The next item that was held is with regards to encampments. Councillor Aylwin, you held the item.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Just give me a second here. I'm going to pull up some amendments. I'll put the motion on the floor as printed, but I do have some amendments here, and they have been circulated to council. I think it's probably best procedurally to do them one at a time here. So the first amendment is fairly simple, and that is to, let me just pull up the main motion here. So it's to amend paragraph 1 of the motion to add, quote, or other immediate alternative sheltering arrangements after the words hotel model of emergency shelter. So the paragraph would read that the City of Barrie calls on the provincial government, the federal government, and the County of Simcoe to immediately extend funding for the hotel model of emergency shelter or other immediate alternative sheltering arrangements with a plan to create permanent social and supportive housing for individuals currently living in emergency shelter.
Okay, that amendment's been circulated. Would you care to speak to it?
Sure. So as we know, the hotel model of emergency shelter has been given a 2-week extension with no alternative on the horizon after those 2 weeks. And we know there are about 100 people who have nowhere to go once that option is no longer available. So I think Barrie City Council needs to be a strong voice advocating to the provincial government, the federal government, and the County of Simcoe be a strong voice for our residents who are unhoused. We know that the provincial and federal governments have the legislative power and the spending power to be able to address these issues while municipalities struggle with that. We do have limited legislative authority and spending authority to be able to extend this funding. And the amendment itself is to recognize that we just want to see people in a safe situation. If it's not the hotel model of emergency shelter, but some other form of emergency shelter, or even better, housing, then that would be a great thing to see. So it's recognizing that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Aylwin. On the amendment, members of General Committee. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Thank you also to everyone that's been working so hard on this motion over, we're, I think, going into about a month to make sure we get as many details and as many points as covered as possible, and a lot of collaboration behind the scenes, which is really great. So my wording would be just a little bit different, but would include the inclusions that Councillor Aylwin did have. I've circulated, I think I've circulated my amendment. Let me just pull it up here. We have so many of them. Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you. And so it's that the City of Barrie calls on the provincial government, federal government, and the County of Simcoe, this is for paragraph 1, to immediately facilitate a meeting with all stakeholders surrounding the homelessness crisis in Barrie, to create an immediate plan to relocate anyone not able to be sheltered when the Travel Lodge program expires, and to work together to establish permanent social and supportive housing for individuals currently living in emergency shelters, which includes discussion regarding additional funding options from all levels of government. And I can speak to that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Are you intending this as an amendment to Councillor Aylwin's amendment?
Yes. So I don't know if you want to just vote on his first and then come back. It's just more so maybe we can work this out just by talking. My focus of mine is, number 1, to also have a meeting of all stakeholders, and that would be immediately, and obviously the invite list would be a collaborative invitation through myself, Councillor Aylwin, yourself, and service providers beyond. And that was more of my highlight to number 1. I understand that we're, of course, discussing funding, and that is needed. And I know Councillor Aylwin has a motion coming forward discussing city funding, which is great. But I think it's important that we highlight we need to sit down at the table and discuss those reasons why we need funding at all different levels. The province, I have been working with MPP Kanjan quite extensively, and the province did give some funding. We do need more, absolutely.
Okay, so just before we get into the debate on the item, Councillor Harris, So we do have an amendment that was first introduced by Councillor Aylwin. That amendment is to add some words to the printed motion. Yeah, and sir, you're welcome to join the public gallery. Thank you.
That's okay. Sorry, my mic on.
So, and I think that we're mixing two separate issues here now. So what I'm going to suggest is we discuss and vote on Councillor Aylwin's amendment.
Sounds great.
And then if you wanted to maybe add another paragraph around the meeting you hope to direct,
Yes.
I can work with you a little bit on the wording there, because I think you need to give somebody specific responsibility to set it up rather than asking all three levels. But why don't we just deal with Councillor Aylwin's amendment first, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Harris.
Okay, sure.
Okay. So the amendment that's on the floor from Councillor Aylwin is the one that was circulated to add the words "or other immediate alternative sheltering arrangements" after the words "hotel model of emergency shelter." So on that amendment, Councillor Thompson, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to the mover of the motion. I fully understand what we're trying to accomplish here and stuff. The only question I have is, and just maybe a little bit of clarity, because like Councillor Harris said, this has been working on for about a month. So just so I can understand a little bit, when I first moved to Barrie, they started a program out of the cold, and it was exactly what that was. It was faith-based and churches and stuff like that. And then we evolved and we transitioned to the Busby model, which was a 365-day, only evenings. And then COVID hits and we transitioned into the hotel model, which was absolutely necessary for all the obvious reasons. The delivery of this service in the Travelodge is far too expensive for the county and council to endure. What is the actual transition out of the hotel model? Or was it planned that this would be a continuation? And I know, build 1,000 homes and get back into co-op building and municipal building, but I mean, I gotta believe the organizations had to think of a transition not to come to council for these motions and this, this situation that we're gonna be in very, very shortly. So if you could just maybe give me some clarity, please.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and thank you, Councillor Thompson, for the question. I think it's a really important question. So I think there's a couple things at play here. So, of course, the plan to transition from the hotel model is underway, and the organizations are working as hard as they can to find shelter spots in existing locations, new locations. I think the main issue here is that the need has really grown so substantially. So yes, we're trying to transition back to the model we were using before the pandemic, but we're in a different world. We're in an affordability crisis, and the housing crisis has gotten so much worse, and we have more people experiencing homelessness in the county and in our city. We have more people living rough in tents in our city. So we can't just go back to the same model that we were using before the pandemic, because the need has grown so drastically. So that's what this motion is recognizing, is that we need to actually enhance the model in order to support the growing need in our community, with keeping our eye on the prize, which is permanent social and supportive housing for people, because emergency shelter isn't housing. It's a stopgap measure to protect people in the short term, but it's not permanent housing. And we do need it in the short term because people's lives are at risk, and that's why this motion is before council tonight.
So, Councillor Thompson, just before we continue, because I think this will shed light probably on this whole debate tonight. Tomorrow morning at Committee of the Whole at County, there's a staff report entitled Temporary Motel Shelter Model Wind Down and Transition Plan. It is a 7-page staff report. It is county staff reporting to county council on the plans, not, to be fair, not only for the facility in Barrie, but in Midland, Collingwood, and elsewhere. Everybody's welcome to read this for themselves. It's been on the county's website for a few days, and it'll be discussed at Human Services Committee tomorrow. But county staff, of course, within social and community services, have the responsibility for delivering these services. In the city, we pay for a good chunk of them, And especially in the last 3 or 4 years, we've started to partner more actively with the county to deliver some of these services, in part, not to deliver them. That's done by the providers. Really, it's been to fund or augment funding. You know, one of the first things this council did was provide capital funding to the Busby Center for their 88 project. And, you know, it's shelter capacity that's in part the issue in this staff report and today. But to your question around where's the transition plan and what would, what's the expected result, you know, when the hotel model is wound down, there's a huge gap between the capacity that exists in the shelter system provided by 4 charities in Barrie and the number of people that are being served today. And so we expect that barring some other change, some improvement to the transition planning that's gone on, those folks are going to be into the community, into encampments. And I think the other thing I would add to Councillor Aowen's description, and there's some mention of this in the county staff report, but the acuity of a lot of the folks who are at the Travel Lodge today or experiencing homelessness today in our community is higher. The seriousness of the challenges that they face. I mean, we have folks who are discharged basically straight from hospital into this facility and do not have the capacity to live without support. They just don't. So the transition planning that has occurred has attempted to create some transition capacity, but it's run into serious problems. The county staff report notes that there's been a church that's come forward to offer overnight rest, but you can't sleep, so it's not a shelter option. And really, there isn't a lot of other capacity at all. So I guess the reason I wanted to raise all of this, members of General Committee, is because I think the amendments that are coming forward tonight are trying to address the fact that because of the intense housing crisis, because there's been no investment in capacity, but the number of people needing help has grown so much, that we now have a huge number of people that are trying to live rough with no support. And there are many people in that population who will not be able to do that. They just will not. And I'm hugely concerned about them, so hence where we are. But I think to your question, Councillor Thompson, this will be discussed by the people who have responsibility for it and have been working on the issue for the past several months. But I can tell you I have a great deal of concern that the gap between what's able to be deployed to assist people as they exit the hotel and what's needed is enormous. Back to you.
Just to follow up, and I appreciate that in the context and stuff. And this is where I struggle with this, is because like our 4 providers are bending backwards. They're doing everything. Like they're at, you know, the end of the rope. Like it's, you know, and it's really, really challenging on them. But, and I understand we do have some responsibility, but it feels that it's always being put on us as a council, and we keep bailing out the county. Like they are the creators of this problem by the lack of funding. And to go back to the taxpayer, which, you know, you clearly said, we already pay a big portion of the county's money, where the influx of people here is because of the room they provided. And now they're closing the model, which, and I understand it's, you know, it's circumstances, you know, not controlled by, you know, with the housing prices and a lot of other things, but it's, they went from a certain number at the Comfort Inn to an increased number at the Travel Lodge, which we keep maxing out everywhere we go, and then they pulled the carpet out from under, which now is going to be on the laps of council, and we're already covering that bill. And I've seen the other amendments. I think we've got to be really careful that we got to stop bailing out the county when they've created a lot of the, you know, and I'm not saying bail out the county and stuff, but it's, you know, like in, you know, with Councillor Natalie Harris's motion, you know, to have a meeting, you know, with all due respect, Mayor Lehman just had it. So, you know, we could run in circles, but it seems like everything we try to do, it's the 11th hour, it's piecemeal, and we've talked about this for 4 years, and I hate to say this, we've done nothing. Absolutely nothing. You know, 40,000 for a warming center, 9 people. You could have stayed in the Royal York. Like, you know, we just seem to be like falling over ourselves to try to fix something that we can't all get together at all levels, you know, and to your point, Mayor Lehman, you had the meeting and you didn't come out, you know, really positive anyways,
No.
and, you know, excited about it. So, like I said, I understand the motion and I'll listen to my colleagues, but I don't know. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
It's frustrating.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. I guess I would throw in, though, that, you know, I was talking to CIO Press about this today. I think when we look at the last 2 years, I think I would question whether City Council's done nothing. We've provided support for applications for RHI, including real dollars, to try and get supportive housing built. We did provide substantial amounts of funding through the CIP to Redwood Park, both for the original Lucy's Place and for Lillian Crescent and a few other projects. But the city's capacity to build supportive housing on the scale that's needed today, we don't have it. We don't have the fiscal capacity. The county and the city together kind of do, but the biggest issue is, and I'm not going to go on a big anti-rant here, but the federal government has not invested in supportive housing in Barrie. We had 2 years. We knew the population was growing. We knew what the answer was. We made applications, but those applications were not successful. And because our eggs were in that basket, we're here today. And that is the frustrating part. And there's lots of blame to go around, frankly, for all 4 levels of government, including us. But we're in the situation today. So I guess I would encourage General Committee with our discussion today to attempt to do some good in a difficult situation and try and keep our eyes on what can make a difference from here forward. Who's been involved or not involved, who's funded what, is not a useful discussion at this point. At this point, we have 100 people who are living in the community, and fortunately, I think the county, to be fair to them, has seen that at least a little longer is going to be needed, and it's certainly going to need to be more than 2 weeks. But I would just urge General Committee, as you consider these amendments, to try and keep your focus on how can we make a positive impact with our limited resources at our level and without the mandate to be doing these sorts of things, which is you're right, the counties. But we have, as General Committee, as Barrie City Council, on a number of occasions, chosen to say more is needed to support the most vulnerable in our community, and on many occasions we have chosen to provide that. Sometimes in the form of housing, sometimes in the form of low-income support programs, sometimes through initiatives like the original warming center at the bus terminal. We have made those choices because we did not feel that enough was being done. Again, who was responsible in the blame game is not going to help the folks who need help, so that's what I would encourage all of us. We're back on the amendment, and Councillor Thompson, you good? Okay. Who else would like to speak to the amendment? I did see Councillor Reitman, I think, and I saw Councillor Harris first. Go ahead, Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. I was privy to the meeting, a last-minute meeting that did happen a couple days ago, and the problem is also, and this isn't about the blame game, and I'm really trying to keep my level of frustration at a good level here, but there weren't the right people around the table, and there needs to be another meeting. And so, for example, MPP Kanjans, she's spoken on her own to 19 churches, 9 not-for-profits, 3 for-profits. There's lots of discussion going on around like how we can even use some of the models that are happening at Lucy's Place with the buildings that they've added, the shipping containers. And looking even at for-profits that some people are even excited about maybe coming forward to help. There's more around the conversation, and it can happen with better dialogue and everyone sitting at the table. I think that's important. I'm not here blaming and pointing fingers, but the fulsome conversation, here I am with the word fulsome again, hasn't happened. That's where we're at. And if the county's giving a staff report tomorrow, I'm sorry I keep on looking at you, Councillor Thompson, I'm not yelling at you. It's too late. How are we here? How are we sitting here still? So yes, there's a gap in communication and a gap, and how are we going to get all levels of government at the table, etc. It needs to happen, and I'm definitely willing to assist with that, even if it means working into these summer months and getting this done, because it isn't that people, if a meeting happened a couple days ago, important people weren't around the table to be able to comment on that. So that's where I want to leave that comment. And we'll go forward, hopefully looking at a lot of different options that Councillor Aylwin is going to bring forward as well. But to clarify about blame game, it's not a point about blame game, it's about responsibility that we all have to take, and we all have to recognize that sometimes there weren't the right people at the tables.
Okay, the amendment that's on the floor is to add other immediate alternative sheltering arrangements. So Councillor Harris, to your point around faith communities that might be interested, it'd be great if some of that could happen, although, again, as has been indicated, people can't sleep there. And that is the problem with the shelter system, or at least with the current fire code and building code and that sort of thing. Councillor Rietman, go ahead.
I think I'm going to pass. I think what I was going to say has been said, so.
Okay, so the amendment that's currently on the floor is to add or other immediate alternative sheltering arrangements. Go ahead, Councillor Gary Harvey, and then Councillor Jim Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'm very supportive of the amendment. I guess my only question to the mover of it, I know a lot of our local resources that deal with this part of our community are at their breaking point. They're strapped, they're extended right to, and the pandemic didn't help things. So they were already stretched at the beginning. With this amendment, though, are these resources actually going to be able to fulfill what you would like to fulfill with the fact that they're stretched and they're tired? Because the pandemic's really put an additional significant pressure on those workers.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and thank you, Councillor Harvey, for that question. You're right. I think all these services are definitely at their wits' end. But I think the issue here is that they need more resources to be able to deal with the scale of the problem, because the scale of the problem has grown so much. So that's what this motion is actually asking for, is calling on the levels of government with the legislative and the spending power to step up to the plate and support these organizations, recognizing that they're stretched to their breaking point. This funding running out and people being displaced from the travel lodge is not going to be a relief for the people working in shelters. They're seeing the people that they serve every single day being let out on the street with nowhere to go, and that's extremely distressing. And it's also way more difficult to serve a population that's spread out throughout the city in encampments rather than in an emergency shelter. So that's what we're trying to get at here, is how do we support the work that they're already doing by giving them additional resources so that they have some certainty about the service that they can provide to the population that needs it.
Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate that. I share some of Councillor Thompson's concerns. Like, I mean, it is a county responsibility. Obviously, we're the urban center of Simcoe County, and that's how our population of the unhoused increases exponentially compared to other areas within Simcoe County. And obviously, we've got the largest hospital in the area, and as Mayor Lehman mentioned earlier, these people get released with no resources tied to them at all. And it's a good thing that we do have the resources available, even though they are strapped. Just curious, like, I mean, has there been any discussions? Like, I know Redwood had their application to the federal government. There's also another group that's predominantly been in southwestern Ontario and has built as close as Mississauga, Indwell, which is a Christian-based organization that kind of does a similar thing as to what Redwood wanted to do here. Has there been any discussions with Indwell at all since Redwood got declined from the federal government with that grant?
I can probably speak to, there's been none that I'm aware of with my office, but again, it's the county, you know, that extends operating funding and the application that Redwood put forward, it was supported by, I think, $2.5 million per year of operating funding. So this group would need to go to the county and explain what they would need on an operating funding basis before they could get their support for an application, then move in. We have had a few other providers approach us. I think it's fair to say, Councillor Harvey, that anything and everything would be considered, but there is no existing capacity today, and these projects take some time.
Okay, thank you. The only thing that I want to add is, and this is more of a shout out to some of the work behind the scenes that MP Broussard has been doing over the past several days and week, because obviously with that declined application, we're now into that situation that we see ourselves right now. So I know he's doing everything within his power to see what federal funding he can get funneled to hopefully reverse that decision. So obviously there's a lot, the higher the level you go, the harder it is to get the money moving, but let's hope the federal government's listening and get something going here, because this is an extremely unfortunate situation that these people find themselves in. And especially, my heart really goes out to the workers. Like, I mean, these people have been strapped to their wits' end, especially because of the pandemic.
Councillor Jim Harris.
Great, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Yeah, and I obviously share the concerns with the greater issue and the potential for a solution and the amendment that's being proposed. I don't see that as unreasonable. You know, we're calling on the provincial government, federal government, and the county, and we hope that call is answered. I guess my question is, and I appreciated you noting that report, Mayor Lehman, from the county of Simcoe, and I haven't read that, and I was not aware of that, so thank you for highlighting that. What made me hopeful, because one of my concerns, and I was concerned with the original motion, which I understand there's many amendments to come, was the potential for having different policies across the area. And having spoken to community members from other municipalities who are regional hubs, when your policies are different across a region, it creates challenges. So with that paper, Mayor Lehman, is there efforts across, you mentioned, I think, Midland, Collingwood, Orillia, Wasaga, similar efforts to address and contribute to finding alternative sheltering arrangements, along with those that are being considered in Barrie?
Ms. McAlpine, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor Harris. It's my understanding that the county has been working with the other shelter providers in other parts of the county to see if there are available spaces. They certainly have moved out of the hotel model in other areas of the province and have been assisting in other areas of the county directly through the county. However, as the largest location with the largest number of people to serve, those other locations such as Midland have much smaller capacity than exists here. And our existing shelter providers have been working diligently to try and free up additional space where feasible, assist people into permanent housing, and the county has been doing that as well through Empower Simcoe.
Great, thank you. Maybe follow up with Ms. McAlpine. Thank you for that, Ms. McAlpine. I noted in one of the individuals who had spoke, I believe in one of the articles about the pending closure of the travel lodge, had mentioned about he would be having to move back home, I think it was East Coast. I'm wondering as well, when this happens in a variety of different contexts, is assisting with repatriating people to their home communities, whether it might be an option, whether it be family, friends, is that part of the suggested solutions?
Through Mayor Lehman to Councillor Harris, yes, that is, of course, a solution, and I know the shelter providers work very hard with people to ensure that if they need support, whether that's transportation support or others, to return to where they have family and supports. They work very closely with people and have been focused on that for the last little while. And the county also provides some funding for some of that transition as well, to assist people to return to places where they have family and other supports that will ensure that they are successful, hopefully, in their home location.
Great, thank you. And do we have, again, follow Mayor Lehman, Ms. McAlpine, is through you to Ms. McAlpine, is there a sense of the potential number of individuals who would fall into that category of maybe having options that extend through that method?
Through Mayor Lehman, and to you, Councillor Harris, I believe the number would change on a regular basis depending on the needs. I think the shelter providers would indicate that with the closure of some other hotel models in other parts of the province and elsewhere in the country, they've seen an influx at certain times, but the numbers change regularly, and the shelter providers would be better able to answer that.
Yeah, and thank you. And maybe just if I continue that questioning thoughts, Mayor Lehman, so you mentioned the closure of other shelters impacting areas. Is that one of the challenges that is experienced as other communities close first, that other communities who continue to provide that level of service will see an influx? Is there a migration type of activity that happens with that event?
Through Mayor Lehman to you, Councillor Harris, that is believed to be a contributing factor, that some other communities, their motel or hotel models have already closed, and that may be contributing to the numbers that are number of people who are approaching Barrie, as they know that the hotel model still exists in this location, but it's certainly not the only factor.
Yeah, thank you. A multitude of factors in this challenging situation. Maybe, I don't know if you have the answer, and Councillor Thompson alluded to the, many years ago, this community invested in Out of the Cold program, and it was incredibly successful. Community effort, churches, faith community was the leader in this effort, and we're grateful for that. And we understand how that actually the initial impact was it made our shelters actually have capacity, because the people for whatever reason, chose the Out of the Cold, probably because of the great meals that the churches provided, because they were outstanding. And then we created a central intake to hopefully then use the shelter beds first before using the Out of the Cold. So, but but even having said that, every year and having had the privilege to work with people who've experienced homelessness, that some, when the Out of the Cold ended, they chose, not to go to a rooming house, which may have its own set of challenges, and living on, a very modest amount of income. There was a calculation that having a place outside was a better solution for them. Do we know of the numbers? This may be a hard question to answer, Mayor Lehman, maybe through you to Ms. McAlpine. Of the number that we're still looking to try to adequately support. If there's a number that say, listen, I'm happy to live and move from here to a different location that's not supervised, authorized by somebody else. Do we know how much of the, again, I apologize for the questions, but there's so much, and it's so challenging, trying to somehow modestly reduce the number in any way, shape, or form seems to be hopeful.
Mayor Lehman, through you to Councillor Harris. Again, I think the numbers would change depending on the individual need and experience. Some people, as you mentioned, may find different solutions. They may work together with other people and rent housing accommodation as a group. There are concerns associated with that. In some cases, people are choosing something that's not the most safe environment for them to live in, just to have a place to sleep. People couch surf. There are a number of challenges when there is a shortage of housing. I did want to note that the county has offered some motel vouchers or to Elizabeth Fry, I'll say the proper name, and Busby Center until December. That may not suit everyone's needs. So they have been able to offer that on top of the 2-week extension. However, as that's less costly than the motel model, but it isn't necessarily the solution for everyone. But I did want to note that as well, as that may not be well known.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Ms. McAlpine. Maybe I can ask somebody else a different questions that came up for me. I was curious. And maybe through you, Mayor Lehman, maybe Councilor Natalie Harris. I know you've been involved in having discussions, and I appreciate the efforts that you're taking. Have there been discussions, I know in the past they've been a resource, and I even remember, utilizing the availability of unused residences over the summer because the students are generally not around. And is that on the table, the ability to activate unused residences through the college, whether it be through one of their campus-related, or I know there's some that aren't, I guess, I don't know if officially Georgian College residents, but they're private operators that provide residence at or for Georgian College?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, no, not that I'm aware of for that specific option. I do know that empty businesses and empty buildings that maybe are closed down commercial areas, but then again, zoning comes into play. Again, of course, we can alter that if necessary. Housing would be the preferable way because you already have all the things that you need necessities-wise, but no, answer is no to that question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was just curious.
Sorry, I'll just jump in, Councillor Harris. Yeah, Georgian was approached by the county. There's been a couple of rounds of discussion with Georgian College. I would not be able to shed any further light on where that discussion sits today, unfortunately. These are really, though, I mean, Ms. McAlpine's doing her best to answer questions. Councillor Owen, myself, Councillor Harris, we're trying to answer questions. This effort's been underway for 6 months by county staff in conjunction with service providers. I think what we're seeing here today is we're all concerned that the outcome is not going to be good enough, that when the motel funding is cut off and those individuals have to find some alternative, that there won't be one because the transition plan does not appear to be in any way sufficient. So I guess I imagine all 11 of us have thoughts as to what you might do in an emergency. I mean, I urged our MP, well, there was one MPP that attended the call, no MPs, but to be fair, some sent office staff. I urged everybody in the correspondence I've issued to the other levels of government, including the county, to treat this like a disaster. I mean, if we had 100 people that were homeless after, for example, a tornado, we would be moving heaven and earth to find roofs and the support services that are needed. And that's the situation that's being faced. The county, to be fair to them, and as Ms. McAlpine has said, I think is realizing that there's more, at a minimum, there's more time needed and probably more funding needed. But I'm not sure that, with respect, council around this table tonight is going to pick out another building or find another alternative, because there's certainly no idea of what that would cost, what's feasible, or so on. So I guess I would urge members of the General Committee, I'll push you back to the amendment. The amendment is to ask the province, the feds, and the county to extend funding for an alternative. But there are people who've spent 6 months trying to find this alternative. I think we're all just quite concerned by what we're hearing from the service providers, that the alternatives that have been identified are not going to cut it. So, long way of saying, rather than us spending our time trying to spitball an alternative, which I'm not sure we're going to effectively come up with, let's talk about how perhaps we can provide funding and use our voice to ensure that those alternatives occur, rather than people being out on the street, for what it's worth. Anyway, you still have the floor, Councillor Harris.
Yeah, Mayor Lehman, thank you for that. I think we're all I support the amendment, and my mind and thought is going towards maybe other items, and I don't believe, unless I missed the report that kind of highlighted that breakdown, is if it was an emergency, what are the emergency standards where we do, here's how many people would do this, here's how we would move forward. I don't think I've seen that, so those create the questions that I have as far as how we really mapping out this plan. because the snow always flies in Barrie in the wintertime. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you for that redirection, and I appreciate that we have more to consider, so thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And maybe before I comment on this amendment, there's been a couple conversations, meetings going on that they've been private or they've been public. I know you've had a few meetings. Councillor Harris had a few meetings, and I'm a little lost in translation here on what's been accomplished in these meetings. We're asking for other levels of government to add immediate alternative sheltering arrangements. Have those questions already been asked in these meetings? You'd be my first question. And this council has written a lot of letters to higher levels of government, and I quite frankly don't know if that's actually served the city of Barrie in any way. And I'm not trying to be rude, I'm not trying to be anything but direct here. Yes, there is an issue here that we need to solve, right? And I want to be a part of solving this, but this amendment here, I find it hard to believe, Mayor Lehman, that you weren't sitting in a room and you've asked this exact question. So maybe I could ask you to comment, and maybe the other people.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things I asked in the meeting was there are provincial facilities, including the Kempenfeld Center, which is vacant. It's a residential use. It was a camp used to train forest rangers for 50 years, and then a conference center. It's been sitting there vacant. I asked if the provincial government could consider that as a potential emergency alternative shelter. I asked about the provincial complex in Springwater. I urged the county, who are working with us, I want to be careful in how I say this, that the warden has been very supportive, county staff have been responsive, but a solution has not yet been delivered, I would say. Councillor McCann, there were discussions around whether there was a city building that could be used. You know, there have been those ideas, but you know, again, I agree with Councillor Thompson's frustration. Here we are at the level of the mayor and the MPP and everybody who wants to do well by the population that's being served, 3-4 days before the end of funding, trying to come up with a transition plan ourselves. And I believe everybody's motivated by the right reasons. I mean, everybody wants to help. But I think there's real risk of madly off in all directions and nothing getting accomplished. That's my real concern.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, and that's kind of what I thought you would say. Now, maybe the other two kind of leaders here, if they'd like to tap in, if that's okay, Mayor?
Sorry, who are you referring to?
Well, I'm guessing Councillor Natalie Harris and Councillor Elwin.
Sure.
They've been talking to higher levels of government already, right? So I'm just curious if you can share with us what has been said already, because I guess what I don't want to do is poke a bear, right? Like, I mean, if the motion's already in motion and the province and the feds are already coming up with a solution and we're here trying to throw a stick in their spokes, I'm not in favor of this. But I am in favor of getting to a solution as quick as possible.
Okay, Councillor Natalie Harris, did you want to comment?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Lehman. Thanks for the questions. Yeah, it's a really great question. I agree. I feel your frustration. So most of my conversations have been with MPP Andrea Khanjin. And like I said, she has an extensive list that her and her team have been contacting, what might be duplicating what has already been happening behind the scenes with the county, but just in case. So 19 churches, 9 not-for-profits, 3 for-profits, beyond. Also looking into options such as Global Medic, where they can bring in big tents, etc. There's a lot of safety concerns around it as well. Getting down to your point, like, we have had these conversations like constantly for many for the full month for sure, and knew about this and were kind of raising the warning flag prior to that. And that is why my wording is going to come forward with my amendment is I'm very firm in saying not everyone has been at the table that needs to be at the same time. And I get that that's complicated, and I get that that's a lot of invitations, but the options are still out there. Like Councillor, or MPP Kanjan is looking, like I said, to maybe get some more of the bins or the units that are behind Lucy's place, and looking into like for-profit people that we can make this happen. But that also has different layers of making sure we have water accessible, etc. So I'm as frustrated as you that we don't have a solution right now, but a big part of the solution, I think, hopefully will come with another amendment that Councillor Irwin's going to bring. And to be fair, just a true and honest and a table of individuals that we can come together, and for whatever reason, politics is heavy. There's a lot of it going on around here, that's for sure. And this is where politics, of course, is part with funding, but we need to have the conversations and the collaboration with everyone. And right now, that just isn't happening. And I get it that the county's doing everything they can, but there's individuals that still haven't been approached, etc. So there's just more to this that I think could have been done, and here we are. And I'm not ready to point fingers in all the directions either. We're wasting time. We're wasting valuable time. Work has been happening behind the scenes. I think certain people haven't been at the table to make sure the conversation starts from scratch where it belongs. And that's where I think we need to go from this. And I'm very willing to assist with who should be sitting around the table, in my opinion, with my experience in this community and services. And use the people as well that I know that would have additions for recommendations around this table, and go from there. Because guess what? We have nothing. We have no answer. So if we don't start from there, we're going to have a lot of piecemeal options coming forward again without a concrete answer. And Councillor Aylwin's motions are going to hopefully address some of the things with respect to funding. But we had a provincial election that took a lot of attention away from certain things. And, you know, now we have a municipal election on the forefront. And it was just not a fulsome job, in my opinion, from my experience, what I see right now.
Does anybody else have anything to add? Councillor Aylwin?
Go ahead, Councillor Allen.
Not much to add except to say, you know, I've been meeting in my capacity as a chapter member in the Barrie chapter of Simcoe County Alliance to End Homelessness, and that's been more my focus. And you know, I try to recognize my strengths, and my strength is not meeting with our MPs and MPPs, to be honest. And I think our head of council does a great job of doing that and advocating on our behalf. And I think the motion here tonight, the amendment that we're talking about right now, is really about having that united voice. And you know, no one really speaks on behalf of council except council as a whole. And I think that does carry weight, and that does matter. It does feel like we send a lot of letters that don't get a response or don't move issues forward, but it's one of the few powers that we have, is to speak as a united voice, that this is something that we believe in, that our residents need, and that we think should happen, and I think we should use that power whenever we can.
Well, thank you all for your input. It's a little clearer than mud for me. I feel that there's a lot of conversations going on, and maybe I'll just ask some maybe macro questions for the province, and Mayor Lehman, if you want to answer them, or maybe Don McAlpine or anybody that has some expertise that I don't at this moment. But the homeless situation here in Ontario, is there pockets in Ontario that are increasing? Is it increasing as a whole collectively, or is Barrie a bit of an anomaly and we're increasing the homeless by 50% from the last report back out in, I think it was February?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what I know, and Ms. McAlpine may wish to comment. So Ontario's big city mayors, this was on our agenda 10 days ago, because virtually every mayor of every large city in Ontario is seeing exactly the same type of problem. Not only is there a housing crisis in Ontario, there was a pre-existing and very severe poison drug crisis, and mental health challenges have only gotten worse during the pandemic. And so all of us collectively, led by Mayor John Tory in Toronto and Mayor Cam Guthrie in Guelph, requested an emergency meeting with the Premier. That has yet to happen, but because this is occurring all across the province, it was of concern to all mayors. I think what might be different in the Barrie case, and I posted something about this today, is many of those cities Toronto, Hamilton, Ottawa, among them, got block funding for supportive housing from the federal government 2 years ago and have built it. Toronto used shipping containers. They built 2 supportive housing developments during COVID. Those are open now. Now, Toronto has an enormous issue compared to Barrie. Add 2 zeros to the numbers of people that need help in Toronto, but that is not to lessen in any way the extent of the issue here, because their resources are vastly larger as well. The shelter system in Toronto is thousands and thousands of spaces, and in Barrie it's measured in dozens. So I think, yes, it is happening all across the province. The local dynamic that makes it more difficult for us, aside from the intense shortage of rental housing, is that there was no substantial investment in supportive housing or shelter capacity during COVID here.
Call to vote.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I don't think there's anything that I could add.
Okay, so I appreciate that insight. So if it's increasing at a rate of 50% all across the province, my next question may be already answered. And is that 50% increase that we have here in Barrie? Do we know if that's imported? If it's local people, or if it's imported homelessness? And if it is local homelessness, people that have already been living here, is it because of social issues, or is it because of loss of job? Just to get a little more insight on who exactly we're helping here, and we're helping our own.
So, Councilman McCann, I happen to bring with me the homeless enumeration from January, which is on the county's website and gives a lot of detail both by area and some of the underlying causes. More than 70% of the individuals who are experiencing homelessness have mental health challenges. More than half have substance abuse challenges. Almost all, if not 100%, are below the poverty line in terms of income. There are some numbers on where people lived before going into the system, but I think it's fair to say people do move around. I don't have numbers, and I'm not sure if anyone does, as to where the current 300 or so people in the shelter system and in the hotel model are from. I don't know if we know that, Ms. McAlpine.
Mayor Lehman, I don't have that information. There may be some information through the service providers, but I don't have the specifics. I think they would, the service providers would indicate, though, that a large proportion of the people are local to the area and have experienced significant economic impacts, particularly since the pandemic.
Let's give me a second to process, if you don't mind. I see that there's going to be an ask for like $400,000 down the road, and so this First Amendment doesn't ask for any money, asks to research, and so I understand that, but sometimes these have a bit of a domino effect, and they build momentum, and I really wish we would have actually made these together if we could talk about the money in this amendment, but it's been split up that way, so I'll talk about that later. I guess the question I have, and I'm sure you'll have it, Mayor Lehman, is the transition plan, like the provincial government and federal governments, they've given us no funding. Sorry, the federal government is giving us zero funding over the past 3 or 4 years, but the province must have given us funding for a transition plan. Yes.
No funding comes to the city of Barrie, Councillor McCann.
No, I'm talking about the county, Mayor Lehman.
So the county of Simcoe received 5 tranches of what's called SSRF, the Social Service Relief Fund, during COVID. That's what paid for the hotel model. There is no 6th round. So the service providers are able to make some choices, i.e. the county can spend that money within the guidelines that have been given to them by the province. And that's why they're able to, for example, extend another 2 weeks for some portion of the hotel model. They're able to spend some funding on going back to shelter. So the organizations that are now returning to shelter, some already have, by the way. Salvation Army was always stayed at the Bayside Mission. Youth Haven has returned from the hotel model to their facility. But then they have separate, it's not all congregate care there. They have different rooms in different capacity. So anyway, long story short, there's been a lot of provincial funding extended, a huge amount. The problem is it's stopping all at once, right? And the issue is the transition plan that's in place right now is causing everyone concern because it doesn't have anywhere near the capacity required to help the people that will have to leave.
Yeah, I guess if I could just speak openly to this council, because I think I just want you to understand exactly where I'm coming from. And for the people that are here in the audience, I definitely want to help. But, I spent a lot of time in marketing and sales, training people in marketing and sales, and I try to actually put myself into the foot of someone that I'm trying to sell. So we are trying to sell the province and sell the federal government on giving us more money. And I'm just trying to look at it through their lens. We're going to write this letter. We're going to say, hey, please immediately do this action because we feel this is the sense of urgency is at a 10 out of 10. Well, they already know that. Or if you're saying that they don't, then we should have written this letter 4 weeks ago. So, I find it hard to believe that they don't see the urgency, but it's a problem all across the province. So they're trying to come up with a solution, not throwing Band-Aids at it. They're trying to come up with a wholesome solution, is what I would believe. And so I'm just looking at, if the province has now done 5 rounds of funding, and now they're at the 6th level of funding, and they stop that, why have they stopped that? Well, maybe because they're not happy with the plan that's in place, right? And is there a transition plan to transition the homeless to stop being homeless, right? And has there been a plan is the question I have for this council. And if there has been a plan, where are we in that plan? And I am going really far down the rabbit's hole because this is a serious issue. We're talking serious money in the next amendment. And instead of me talking every time, I'm kind of being a little more macro here than micro. So if anybody, if the mover of the motion would like to speak to that, I'd love to get your insights.
Yeah, I am going to guide us back to the amendment that's on the floor in the interest of trying to get something done tonight. So absolutely, Councillor Owen, if you wish to speak to some of the issues raised by Councillor McCann, we've all been making comments that are broader than the amendment because I think all the amendments are speaking to a particular issue. So I'm going to allow lots of leeway on this. But I do want us, General Committee, to get back to deciding on this amendment, voting on it, moving on to the other things we might actually do that could have an impact. But Councillor Owen, do you want to speak to that issue,
Sure.
the broader issue?
Sure, very briefly, and thank you for the question, Councillor McCann, because it's an important one. Like, what is the overall plan to end homelessness in Simcoe County and in Ontario and in Canada? And the approach that's been taken over the past few years and that advocates have been fighting for is a housing first approach. And that's a recognition that people need housing as a first step to be able to get help for the problems that they need. So mental illness, substance use, those aren't causes of homelessness. Often it's actually a result of homelessness because being homeless is incredibly traumatic and a terrible experience. So housing first is an approach that recognizes we need to get people into housing, then they have a chance, a fighting chance to be able to get treatment for an addiction they may be facing, get mental health treatment, maybe get a job eventually because they have that stability in their life. And some people need supports to be able to be successful in that housing, and that's what supportive housing is. The issue is that the housing hasn't been built, period. The market, the free market, has not provided the housing that we need to house people in our community, period. And what governments have done in the past is invest in public housing to recognize that housing isn't like any other commodity, isn't like any other product, it's a human right. People need it as a basic human need. We haven't seen that public investment in public housing over the past few decades. We've seen a steady decline since the 90s in that type of investment in social and public housing, and that's where I think the macro issue really comes into play. We need the federal and provincial governments who have the legislative authority and the spending power to make massive investments in public housing because the market isn't meeting the need. That's the long-term solution. In the short term, though, we need to make sure people are safe, and that's the whole conversation about emergency shelter. I hope that helps.
It did, and thank you. You mean, as everyone said today, this is a solution that is, quite frankly, quite difficult and probably not going to be solved tonight.
Okay, on the amendment, which is to add the words "or other immediate alternative sheltering arrangements" to the call to the provincial government, federal government, and the county for immediate funding. Any further discussion of that amendment? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question on that. Those in favor? I am as well, so that carries unanimously, the First Amendment. Okay. And sorry, Councillor Natalie Harris, I should have noted, I think Amendment 4 that's on this piece of paper is yours. Is that correct? The wording that you read earlier, does that match what's been circulated here to members of General Committee?
That might be number 5 now. I think because you had number 4, Keenan? Okay, so then it's 4.
We all have a piece of paper that has 4 amendments. I think
I don't have a piece of paper.
Oh, I only have the piece of paper. Could we get this to all members of council? Could we just email this around then, please?
To be fair,
It's just going to be
poor
easier
Wendy.
than people trying to deal with the,
We've been back and forth
Verbal.
100 million times, so thanks anyways.
yeah, I know everyone was working on this today.
More
And
than
while the
today.
clerk is emailing that around to all members, so you have it, perhaps Councillor Owen, you'd like to introduce amendment number 2. So I'm sorry, Councillor Harris, I thought everybody had that. So go ahead, Keenan.
Yes, absolutely. So amendment number 2 that's been circulated by the clerk through email is to add an additional paragraph as paragraph number 4 that reads that the chief administrative officer or designate be authorized to allocate up to $400,000 from the reinvestment reserve to the County of Simcoe to support one-time costs associated with the transition out of the hotel model of emergency shelter services during the summer of 2022, including but not limited to emergency shelter capacity and on-site addictions and mental health services, and that county staff and council be immediately advised.
Okay. That one, I think, was circulated by email. Go ahead, Councillor Owen.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. So this actually something that Councillor McCann said, I think, puts it really well, the domino effect that can happen when one level of government, often a lower level of government, steps up to the plate and says, this is a problem that needs fixing. Here's what we're willing to contribute to fix the problem. And we may see that domino effect of other levels of government joining in. So the first paragraph that we passed was about that call to the other levels of government. We need them to step up to the plate. This amendment is us stepping up to the plate. It's a small amount, but it could go a long way to helping the people with the highest needs who are going to be displaced from the travel lodge. So the intention here, we know that summer recess is happening, so we want to give our staff the leeway to work with the County of Simcoe on where this funding could be the most effective, going to the people with the highest need to fill in some of those gaps that we've been talking about this evening. So we know that there are people in the shelter right now, as Mayor Lehman mentioned, who have high acuity needs, health needs, mental health needs, and need that support. And I think the city coming to the table with some funding from the reinvestment reserve is a way to be a stopgap measure and put our money where our mouth is in terms of this issue. And hopefully we'll see the County of Simcoe, the provincial government and the federal government step up to the plate too. I'm really hoping that we can all come together on this and make it a good news story about how we rallied around some of the most vulnerable members of our community because they need our support, and this small amount of money could start the ball rolling.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. The clerks look like they want to say something. Oh, good. Okay, thank you for that. Yes, I need to make sure we address the giant screen, Councillor, too. On the amendment, I will go to the giant screen. Councillor Kungle, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And a question of to the amendment, Councillor Aylwin. Just a point of clarification, if you wouldn't mind. Completely appreciating, and I sit at the County of Simcoe Human Services side. County of Simcoe is referenced in the amendment. Is the intention for them to actually have free discretion on this $400,000? Or would it be beneficial to identify if the intention is to tie this to individuals currently serviced in Barrie or to Barrie service provider agencies? And I'm noting that just because we do have that winding down report, and in it I'm reading that we do have shelter systems that I believe could be umbrellaed under the reference to hotel model of emergency shelter services that are in Midland and Collingwood as well. So looking to see if we want to be very clear, if the intention is to be specific to Barrie for the $400,000.
That's a good catch, Councillor Congo. I'm just going to suggest that we could add the words "in Barrie" after emergency shelter services to make it clear that the funding is to be spent in Barrie. I'm seeing a nod from the mover, so that is a friendly amendment. And thank you, Councillor Congo. Did you wish to make additional comment?
I'm fully supportive of that with that amendment. Thank you.
Thanks. I have Councillor Natalie Harris next.
I'm good right now, actually. I'll pass.
Councillor Riepma and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm very supportive of this amendment as well. We have spent a bit of time tonight talking about the issue going all around and what the causes of it have been up to this point. And yes, the solution for sure is to get all levels of government to come to the table. But the real issue here is money. You know, we've been working for months and months on extending the travel lodge, or whether we could buy it somehow, or all of those kinds of issues. And 400,000 in this amendment. I need you to remember that the county has been spending $450,000 a month on this program. So this is money. This is real money, but it isn't enough money. I'm hoping that we will be able to lever this money with the other provinces, with the province and with the county. And I certainly think we cannot fault the county for this. The county's been working very hard with the service providers to try to make this this work. I had hoped that the provincial money would have slowly tapered off so that we could have transition people. The difficulty has been that you know, it runs out the end of this month, and that's it. And we really need to have a solution quickly, as opposed to having you know, new builds and things like that. So I'm interested to see where this how we can lever this 400,000 and ask the federal government and the provincial government to step up to the plate and help us solve this problem. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Riepma. Councillor Harvey, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I am supportive of this. Just a question to the mover of the motion. Has there been any discussions with the county as to what type of dollar value that they can put on the table for this type of initiative also?
Well, I know they already have been putting funding on the table, and the intention, and thank you, Mayor Lehman, for suggesting this wording, that county staff and council be immediately advised. There's a meeting tomorrow with this report that Mayor Lehman referenced on the agenda tomorrow. So I think that's a perfect opportunity for our representatives at County Council to bring that forward to them, saying, look, this is what the City of Barrie has offered. Your turn. What's up?
Great, thank you. In saying that, I have a minor amendment that I would like to add. While everybody was chatting, I was sitting there trying to figure out what our percentage of community services is for Simcoe County, and it's 25.15%. So I would, my amendment is after the word $400,000 would be to add in a 25 to 75% cost sharing agreement. So that way the percentage that we're paying is still proportionate to what our yearly proportionate amount is, and that would then also spur on the county to ensure that they are putting in their fair share too, and it actually may increase the total amount.
Okay, so Councillor Harvey, you would move an amendment to the amendment that would basically require the county to fund I guess it's 1.2 million to match it 3-to-1, if I'm understanding you correctly.
That's correct. It would keep our proportion at the 25% and their proportion at 75%. And I think in the long run, it may actually make the pot bigger than what people would anticipate it.
Okay, so that would be an amendment. Where would you stick that in into the wording, Councillor Harvey?
Unless the clerk has a different suggestion, I would suggest putting it in immediately after the word or the numbers 400,000.
Okay. So that would be subject to the County of Simcoe providing a 3-to-1 matching for the dollars or something like that? Sorry, I didn't catch your wording. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'll just repeat the wording
Yep.
then. After 400,000, in a 25/75% cost sharing agreement.
Okay, so that's an amendment to the amendment, members of council or general committee. And on that, did you want to say anything further, Councillor Harvey?
No, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just following our normal percentage that we would pay on an annualized basis anyway.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Ward and then Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I just have a question for the mover of the amendment. Does that mean, just to make sure I understand it, that means we wouldn't give the money unless the county matched it? Or we'd give the money and we're hoping the county would match it? Not clear.
My intent with this would be that the funds would be released in that same proportion. So if the county came up with the 1.2 million, then the CAO would have the authority to release the full 400,000. However, if they come back with a lower amount, then it would be proportionate to that amount. The rationale behind this is so that way it keeps us paying the same percentage that we would normally through the fiscal year, and not us footing the extra bill if the county doesn't step up like we hope.
Okay, I mean, technically, their 75%, we're going to be paying a third or quarter of that as well. I mean, they don't have a separate pool of money. Their share of the matching funds, a portion of that would come from Barrie taxpayers as well. So I'm not sure what the math formula would be, the magic formula, but I guess I'm worried. If we're going to give the money, we're going to give the money. I don't know whether the county's going to match it, which means that we will end up spending no money. We're at the end of the year. We're not going to be given a chance to amend this motion. Yeah, so if we pass this, I'm afraid the county, which has only one meeting as well tomorrow, they're not going to match it, or at least they're not going to be prepared to match it, and the motel is closing very soon. Yeah, anyways, I'll listen to what other people have to say, but I have a worry that this will not, our intention is to spend 400,000, it will not be spent if we pass this motion tonight, depending on the county coming through with funds.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Councillor Morales next, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. To staff, I'll start with Mr. Prowse. What is that date that we the city of Barrie, renegotiate the contract we have the county for various things? I believe, trying to rack my memory, I think I heard Ms. McCobbin say maybe over a year ago that it was Q4 of 2022, but I just want to get clarity since this discussion is somewhat relevant.
Through Mayor Lehman to Councillor Morales, Ms. McAlpine can correct me, but I believe the service agreement is up this year, at the end of this calendar year. However, the agreement has a default where if a new agreement isn't struck, the old agreement rolls over and continues on.
And negotiations for that agreement occur when?
I believe they're underway as we speak.
Perfect. I don't share the concerns Deputy Mayor Ward has of the county not stepping up with the money. We're going to get it one way or another. We're going to get it tomorrow, or we're going to get it during this renegotiation. I think there's lots of examples about how we need to get a better agreement with the county, and seeing more, whether it's new construction for supportive housing, attainable housing, affordable housing, or emergency funding. I think I was actually not going to support this at all, but I really like Councillor Harvey's amendment to this, and to put it to the table, and I hope that there's a willingness tomorrow from the county to address this in the more immediate terms.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Councillor Harvey, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I just wanted to clarify one point that Deputy Mayor Ward brought up. Indirectly, yes, some of the funds the county has is our money, but as we also receive all these transfer payments from higher levels of government, that's where the substantive amount of money that the county receives comes from, and we're truly a small piece of that, and that's why I just want to make sure that our funding formula stays consistent with the annualized fiscal funding formula that the county already has for the city.
Mr. Prose?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to members of committee, certainly not to insert myself in the debate. However, since my position is attached to this amendment, I would ask clarity from council so that if it does pass, I can execute on your desire. Clarification as to whether you're expecting new money, because I'm pretty sure the county will call me tomorrow and tell me that they spend more than $1.2 million, so they have met their obligation. If it's council's desire that it be new money, I would ask that you stipulate so, and if it isn't, leave it as is. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey?
Actually, I guess in line with the mover of the original motion, the 400,000 is new money. So my expectation would be that the money coming from the county would be new money also.
Yeah, I think one of the awkward things about the timing of this, first of all, the County Human Services Committee meeting is tomorrow morning. There will be little time to make county staff aware of tonight's decision and craft an amendment, but the four of us can do our best. I would suggest that in the staff report that's in front of County Committee tomorrow, they are indicating as follows: costs associated with the outlined transition plan related to alternate secondary temporary shelter locations will be accommodated within federal and provincial pandemic-specific funding envelopes, Reaching Home and Social Services Relief Fund, based on the assumption that the temporary motel shelter model winds down by June 30th. Now, we know they've already extended some of the model hotel funding for another couple of weeks. I assume that's a considerably reduced amount. I understand from one of the providers that it's some of the rooms, not all. And so the funding, they're going to spend a bit more funding on the motel model, but they clearly feel that the remaining funding can still cover some alternative shelter options. What we don't have the benefit of tonight is how much, for how long, what kind of support, what kind of services, or are we depending on the goodwill of the faith communities and otherwise, you know what I mean? So my suggestion would be, if your intent, Councillor Harvey, is to ensure that the county spends 1.2 if we spend 400 on alternate shelter capacity or additional service shelter capacity, that's what we should say. Because I think that's our concern. We want them to spend more to ensure that these individuals are not forced into encampments and so forth. To my mind, how they pay for it's kind of up to them, although we'll have some thoughts, I'm sure, tomorrow morning during the meeting. So I don't know, Mr. Prose, is your desire for clarity is to be able to say to the county, we want you to spend 1.2 million of your reserve funds or additional beyond your current spending, or that that sufficient funds are being devoted to this situation in Barrie? Because I think that's the issue. Is it not?
Mayor Lehman, I choose not to weigh in on what the issue actually is. I'm simply looking for clarification from council so that when you leave here tonight and you believe you've given marching orders, that staff can go off and actually execute on those and not have some ambiguity around whether it was new money or not new money, or are we just looking at the totality of the pie? Either one is fine. We will certainly execute on that. I prefer to have a little clarity around that and not any confusion.
Okay. Councillor Harvey, do you wish to make any changes to your amendment?
Actually, if there's some concern around just that word Barrie being in there, then further down in the original motion from Councillor Aylwin, after emergency shelter capacity, we could add the words in Barrie, and then it's clears
Yeah,
up that.
he accepted that as a friendly
Okay,
earlier, so
yeah.
that's in there for sure.
Yeah, and I'll be quite honest with you, from speaking with our provincial counterparts, the county's already received this transition funding. It's just a matter of how they've decided to spend the transition funding. And that's where it's really on them. I hate to say it, but it's on them. We're stepping up to the plate. Now they need to step up to the plate. And keeping us at the funding formula that is part of our agreed upon agreement year after year is important. And if this pushes them to step up to the plate more, that's the whole intent of this. This should not be just on the city of Barrie. The reality of it is, because we're the urban center of Simcoe County, the people that are in our shelter system right now are coming from all across the county, and some of them are not even coming from our county. Some of them have come from other parts of the province too. And again, obviously we're welcoming. We're not going to turn anybody away from these systems, but it really puts the pressure on us, and it's not just our problem, it's a county problem.
Okay, so the amendment to the amendment is on the floor. Are there any further comments on it? Councillor Aylwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I absolutely understand where Councillor Harvey is coming from on this amendment, because fair is fair, and you know what, I do think we need Barrie to be better served by the services that are provided through our service manager. However, I have some serious concerns and reluctance with this amendment, because we need to think about the impact of this amendment. It's not just about what's fair in this moment and whether they're picking up their fair share. We need to think of the actual impact on the people on the ground. And if we tie this funding, if we make it conditional on them matching the funding, then we're right back to square one, and we have no solution. And there are almost 100 people with no alternative, and there's no $400,000 from the reinvestment reserve to try to fill a small number of those gaps. So we're even worse off. So I absolutely get where you're coming from, but I don't think this is the way to do it, because it doesn't actually stick it to the county. It's actually sticking it to the people who are most vulnerable in our community if it doesn't work out the way we want. And I just think that's too risky at this time. We're running out of time. And, I think if we make a request that the county match it proportional to our population, I think that'd be fabulous. I think that's totally fair. But to make it conditional is just too risky, and I don't want it to be left without a solution a few weeks from now, and then we don't know what to do.
Okay, I have a speakers list. Next on it is Councillor Natalie Harris.
Councillor Aylwin took the words out of my mouth, looking to just change the wording, hopefully to "and request the county include."
Okay, I will look to the mover of the amendment to see whether he's amenable to that. If he is not, we can do it as an amendment to the amendment to the amendment. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do appreciate Councillor Aylwin's comments. Obviously, he's kind of sounding a little doom and gloom, not anticipating that the county's going to play fair ball on this request. I'm not so doom and gloom on this. I think, especially this is in the public domain, and I just can't fathom that county council is not going to see the value in stepping up to the plate at the same funding formula as we already have agreed upon. Again, there's a little bit of a risk to it. I would have hoped that maybe the original mover of the motion would have had some discussions about this at the county level, so that way we could have some type of feel as to which way this is going to go before it hit the council floor. I'm not hearing that, unfortunately, but I think the current amendment is amicable, and it keeps it fair for the taxpayers of the city of Barrie. And we can always readdress this if all of a sudden something significant happens that we don't anticipate. We can obviously have an emergency meeting if we so desire to fix this problem further if we need to. And I'll be quite honest with you, even with the current amendment, if this doesn't fix the issue, there's always that ability to have an emergency meeting if we need to through the summer. So I'm going to leave the amendments where it is, and I would like to call the vote.
Okay, if somebody would like to move an amendment to add the words, sorry, whatever you were looking to do, Councillor Natalie Harris. I was just looking for a yes or no on the friendly, Councillor Harvey. Go ahead, Councillor Harris.
Yeah, I guess, but procedurally, if Councillor Harvey's motion fails, can I bring an amendment in to change the wording to "and request"?
No, because he is looking to do the, it's his amendment to ask the county to share it 3-1. So if we're going to request that rather than require it, we should do that by amendment now.
Okay.
So if you wouldn't mind moving that, if you want to, if you don't want to, we can
Yeah,
just.
so I would like to move that then,
Okay.
yes. Request.
So the amendment to the amendment would be to request that the county cost share on a 3-1 basis. Okay, that's what's on the floor right now. Request instead of require. Strictly on the issue of request instead of require. I will take brief comments, but we are digging ourselves ever deeper, and I wish to see if we can get to some votes and accomplish a few of these things. So on the request or require, anyone wish to comment on that amendment? Councillor McCann.
We need a strong plan, so a request is, to me, not a plan. We need to make this black and white as possible. And I just have a question about this motion. I heard the word Barrie put in there. Is that included in this amendment here? Can you get clarity on that, please?
Yeah, so earlier in the debate, the first comment on the motion tonight was Councillor Kungle, who suggested that we add the words "in Barrie" after emergency shelter services. The mover of the motion took that as a friendly amendment, so it is part of the motion, the overall motion.
So I'd like to comment on that, please.
That's not on the table right now, Mike. What's on the table is, are we going to request or require the 400,000?
Okay, that's what I asked, if it was on the table or now that we're voting for.
Yeah, so the main motion was amended earlier.
Mhm.
What's now on the floor is the amendment as to whether or not we're going to request or require the county to cost share 3-1. That's the only issue we're talking about right now. Do you want to talk about that?
Just did. I said,
All right.
let's not request,
Anyone
let's
else
demand.
on the request or require amendment? Councillor Riepma.
I think we should be on the request side. My fear is that if we require and the county for some reason or other says no or says I'd like another formula, we're just going back down the old rabbit hole again and nothing will get done. And that's my concern. I think we need to do something. I suspect that the county will come to the table. I'm hoping they will. And I'm hoping that we can use this 400,000 as leverage, but I really don't want to require it, because if it is a requirement, we may not accomplish anything, and that's even worse.
Okay, on request or require, Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and I'm strongly in favor of the request. I do feel there's significant risk, although I do appreciate the intention of that amendment. I think we can use that for leverage further down any negotiations, but I cannot support anything that identifies requirement. I think it poses some good effort that we could make tonight at risk and might jeopardize future dialogue with the county.
Okay, on request or require, anyone else? Councillor Aylwin?
Just very quickly, because I think it's pretty clear where I stand. This is a gamble. Like, we don't know for sure that the county is going to match this funding 75-25. We don't know that. And we're gambling with people's lives here, and I just don't think that's okay. So I think we need to be careful here, and that's why I support the amendment to have request.
Okay, Councillor Harris's amendment is on the floor to make this a request, not a requirement for cost sharing. Councillor Harvey, further comment? Then I'd like to call the question.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'm not going to support it, mainly because I think it is important that we need to leverage the county and stick within our agreed upon arrangement that we already have. And if worst case scenario happens, we've got 2 weeks before the current process will come to an end, where we can make decisions and then pick up the slack where others aren't picking up. But I don't anticipate that we're going to be in that position. So I'm going to vote against this amendment.
Okay, on the amendment, any further last comment? Okay, I'll call the question. Those in favor of it being a request rather than a requirement, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and myself is 6. Opposed is 5. So that carries. That changes to a request for the 2575 cost share. Now we are back on that amendment. Okay? So we are back on requesting a 25 to 75 cost share. On that issue, we have not voted. Are there any further comments on adding that request? Councillor Thompson.
No, not on this.
Thanks, Rob. Any further comment? Councillor Jim Harris?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. So I'm pleased that we're looking to encourage the county to contribute at a rate that is understandable and relevant to us. My question would be, given that, and it's good news that we're pushing the number up, and fingers crossed that we get there. The motion, it talks about including but not limited to emergency shelter capacity and on-site addictions and mental health services. Do we know that, I don't know if it's through you, Mayor Lehman, to the mover, if...
Sorry, Councillor Harris, we're not on that yet.
Oh,
We've
sorry.
still got one amendment in between. The piece we're on right now is Councillor Harvey's original amendment to ask for the cost share. We do need to vote on that.
Pardon me.
And sorry, so I'm just going to ask you to limit comments to that.
No,
That is to request a 25 to 75 cost share with the county. I would like to call the question on that, and then we can move to your issue and any others with the original amendment. Anyone else wish to comment? Sorry, Jim, but that's where we are. Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment. Those in favor of asking the county for that 2575? Yes. Opposed? 1. That carries. Now we're back on to the original amendment as amended twice, and I'll go back to you, Jim Harris. Keep talking.
Point of order, Mayor Lehman?
Yes?
There was another no vote on the base.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Congo voted against that? Yep. Okay, so it's 9-2. Go ahead, Councillor Harris. It still carries.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Yeah, sorry, I thought we had that one in the bank. So, so my question is curious, and maybe we don't know the answer. Maybe we do. That, and part of my worry was even that we could adequately resource the on-site addictions and mental health services. So maybe through you to the mover, is that something that's been communicated, that the capacity exists to be able to offer these services? And now that we've expanded significantly the hope, and let's believe that we're successful, has that been vetted?
Well, I think, thank you for the question, Councillor Harris. I think the thing to remember is that a lot of these services are already being provided on site at emergency shelter, and the intention is to have continuity there.
Okay, thank you. And I was wondering if that was in that on-site addiction and mental services, that was the capacity, which I understand if we keep the staffing that's currently there, is that pretty much what it is then? If that's, is that fair to, which I think is more than reasonable?
Yeah, I think the intention is to just ensure that people have the supports that they need, and that this funding be able to, like, we give permission to our CAO to be able to work with the county to see that people's needs are met. That was the intention behind that wording, and I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's maybe just added detail, but definitely having on-site services is really the ultimate goal, it seems like. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I would share the importance of that goal. I would agree. Any further comment on the amendment? Yes, Deputy Mayor Ward. Sorry, you were still on my speakers list from originally.
Yep, no problem.
Go ahead.
So I guess my question is for Councillor Elwin, because Councillor Breed mentioned earlier that was $400,000 a month for the hotel. It's actually $850,000 a month, which means if it ended up only being the $400,000, it would pay for about another 2 weeks of the shelter remaining open. But I was under the impression that's not the intention, was just to fund further. I think, in my mind, that's already been, the transition's already been done, but I think there's some high acuity residents that funding, in my mind, should be directed to the ones that are really going to be in trouble. You know, I'd hate to have the staff, the Busby and EFRI staff, make choices, but they're going to have to. They're going to have to say, these are some people that need the help. And unfortunately, the rest of them are probably going to shift to the Elizabeth Fry Society and the David Busby Center. But I take it you want this money targeted to the high acuity residents, correct? the ones that need the help the most, that can't move into the shelter system.
Yeah, that's certainly the intention. The reality is that we're facing imminent threat to life safety with the closure of Travelodge because of people with high acuity needs with nowhere to go. So that's absolutely the intention here, is to ensure that we do our part, our small part, as the city of Barrie, to try to fill those gaps for the most vulnerable that are being displaced from the hotel model, and then hopefully again we'll see the other levels of government, the provincial and federal government, step up to the plate so that people with any need at all, no matter how high the need is, have their right to housing respected.
Right. But I guess I want to make sure that the CAO realizes that's the intent of this, not just to fund the hotel program for another 2 weeks. It's to help those who need the help the most.
If I might suggest, in order to make the direction of council very clear, we could say to support one-time costs associated with the transition out of the hotel model of emergency shelters services in Barrie during the summer of 2022, prioritizing the highest acuity individuals.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that's what we're going to do. That's where the funding's going to go.
Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Owen? Okay. So everybody clear, that's being taken as a friendly amendment suggested by the Deputy Mayor, worded by me, taken by Keenan. So that is after summer of 2022, the words would be prioritizing the highest acuity individuals. Deputy Mayor Ward, you still have the floor.
No, that was it. I just want to make sure those were the people we're going to spend the money on, the ones that cannot transfer to the shelter.
Thanks for that. I actually would agree with this because those who know the work that we've been trying to do over the last little while, there's every single individual here has their own story and their own circumstance, and they have varying capacity. That's the reality, individual capacity. And I think Councillor Owen rightly has highlighted, and I've been trying to highlight, some of the folks who have been discharged directly, in some cases from hospital, or are experiencing chronic homelessness, are experiencing dementia, are experiencing other severe mental health issues or so forth, have no capacity to live in the community. They just don't. They need the support. They must have the support. And so we want to prioritize the folks who are in that circumstance first. So I would agree with this, Deputy Mayor Ward. Are there other comments on the main motion now as amended? There's a couple of friendlies that have been put in there. There's the amendments that have been addressed. Councillor McCann, go ahead.
I don't have any friendlies, but I'd like to speak last after all the friendlies there, so I can just have a wholesome conversation with the whole amendment.
I think that friendly's done, so you're next. Go ahead.
Okay. I am pretty close to not supporting this, and I'm just going to give you a brief synopsis on why I'm not. I just want to have a little financial history on what we do here as a city of Barrie in this specific case. So we give $7 million to social housing to Summa County every year. We give $7 million. We've already given $3 million to Redwood, and they had a project that I believe is supposed to start in the spring. Can I get an update on if they've started that project, if they've used that $3 million, and where we are with that project?
Mr. Miller, perhaps you could clarify both the amounts to the county and to Redwood.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, so Redwood has recently submitted a request, and we did pay out some funds. It was a relatively small amount, so I think the project is beginning. It's all the details I have. In terms of the county, that's correct. For social housing and the not-for-profit housing, the city in 2022's budget, the total is about $7 million to the county.
So we give $7 million to the county for social and community housing. We've given $3 million to Redwood, that a project that's just starting now, and they spent roughly about $100,000. And can I get some clarity? I guess the Affordable Task Force allotted $5 million to affordable housing. And maybe Councillor Harris, you can maybe give me some light on this if you remember, or Mayor Lehman. That money, has that been allocated, or is that just a wish list?
No, that funding, oddly enough, came with a 2-to-1 match from the county, as you may remember, which would be $10 million. I think it's fair to say there have been no projects that have come forward for that funding at this point. However, the county is pursuing a large-scale supportive housing project for Barrie. So I think that request will come.
And this is important to me, so I'm going to take a little time with this one, if you don't mind. Maybe it's Bala or somebody could answer. Has there been many prospects on having people wanting to use this $5 million to build affordable housing in the city limits?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann, I don't have that information. At this
Yeah,
time.
I wish I would have given you the question earlier. Does anybody have that information at all? I'm pretty sure the person that would have that information is on vacation, I'm guessing, so.
Sorry, Councilor McCann, there's been no call for projects or funding made available. I think the $5 million you're remembering, and I was just referencing, is the Affordable Housing Task Force recommended that the city allocate $5 million towards a supportive housing project, which is a very specific type of, not affordable housing, supportive housing, like Lucy's Place, and that the county match that on a 2-to-1 basis. That would create $15 million. I believe the county continues to pursue a supportive housing project, which is a specific thing, and that request will come to the city. But there's been no, it's not available for affordable housing. That wasn't what the task force committed. And by the way, council has never actually allocated that $5 million. You accepted the task force recommendation, but it needs to come from somewhere and be put into a budget, which would naturally happen at the next budget this fall, which will be the next council's.
Just clarity, you said it's not for affordable housing?
No, it's for supportive housing. So supportive housing is temporary housing where people who are experiencing homelessness get a roof over their head and receive mental health or addictions or employment or physical health supports on site. So it's a temporary form of housing that also allows people to deal with the reasons why they're homeless.
So I just need some clarity from staff. Is that the case that this wasn't for affordable housing? It actually was for supportive housing? Thank you for the lesson on that, Mayor Lehman. But I was pretty confident that this was for affordable housing, not supportive housing.
So I'm not sure if somebody here would care to read the task force recommendation to Councillor McCann, but go ahead, Councillor Prose. Councillor Prose.
Thank you.
CAO Prose.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, through to Councillor McCann. Mayor Lehman, you chaired the task force. I don't have the report in front of me. My memory was it was for sustainable, sorry, what was the terminology used? Supportive, thank you, not affordable housing.
Okay,
But
so
again,
it was task force.
It was a recommendation of the task force. It wasn't a direction per se of council.
Yeah, I understand the direction part, but I'm coming up with a theme here that this $400,000, I might ask Councillor Aylwin, like where will this money be spent? Like I understand the broad vision, but $400,000, I've heard it's not a lot of money. Well, it's a lot of money to me, right? And I understand that there's roughly, how many people are living in the hotel?
Around 200.
So 200. The county's spending $850,000 per month. I'm just not clear on what this $400,000 is going to be spent on. And I'd like some more clarity before I can vote yes for it.
Great question. I appreciate the question, Councillor McCann, and thank you, Mayor Lehman. So the $400,000 is for short-term emergency shelter, recognizing that the hotel model is slated to end. Even though they've gotten the 2-week extension, it will end. And there are almost 100 people with no alternative location to go. So they are being displaced from the travel lodge to the streets or to an encampment somewhere in a park or a forest. Some other people might find other options, we hope. So that's what the $400,000 is for, is to recognize we're in an emergency situation. And I actually share your frustration about the fact that we're spending money on emergency shelter when it doesn't actually solve the issue of homelessness. We need housing to solve the issue of homelessness, and we haven't seen the action from all levels of government to bring true social housing, supportive housing, affordable housing. to bear. It just hasn't happened, and that's why we find ourselves in this emergency situation. The fact of the matter is that paying to house people is actually a lot cheaper than having people experiencing homelessness. People being homeless in our city is very, very expensive. They rely on emergency services more often. They might have to go to the hospital more often. They are traumatized from being out on the street, and so have long-lasting mental health impacts and substance use issues. So that's, I think, the point here is that we should be investing upstream in the solution of housing so that we're actually saving money downstream. Investing in shelter is actually more cost-effective than having people out in encampments or in alleyways or just fending for themselves on the street. It is more cost-effective. It is more expensive than housing, but it's more cost-effective than homelessness. And it's definitely more cost-effective than provincial or federal jails. And we know that often people who are experiencing homelessness are criminalized and sent to jail and further traumatized again and then stuck in a cycle. So I think that's the really important thing to remember here is that investments in real services that get people out of homelessness into shelter as the emergency step, housing as the ultimate step, actually saves us money in the long term. And we need to recognize that and have the political courage to start making those investments now, or else we're never going to get there.
Well, I appreciate that, and I can use some of my political courage right now and still be forcefully against this because we're asking the province and the feds to write a letter so they help us with this issue, and we're just throwing $400,000, and we're not really giving specifics. You had a lot of words there, and a lot of great words, and I asked where was the $400,000 going to go. You said there's 200 people that are actually in this facility, and how many of these people are actually with the new friendly from Barrie, from Deputy Mayor Ward, right, is that going to be attained? Is there 100 people that this money will be going to? Because it's not all 200, obviously.
No, the direction would be that we use the $400,000 in collaboration with the County of Simcoe and the service providers to identify the people with the greatest need, the highest acuity needs, so that no one falls through those people don't fall through the gaps. And then the hope is that with the first paragraph, asking that the provincial, federal government, and the County of Simcoe step up to the plate, that they'll recognize that the City of Barrie we're putting our money where our mouths are and putting up the $400,000 to help the highest acuity need individuals, that they'll step up to the plate and then help everyone else who doesn't have supports. So there are about 100 people with nowhere to go, and $400,000 isn't going to help all of them. It can help some of them, and then I'm hoping it's a catalyst for a bigger conversation about helping everyone. And then, of course, in the long term, we need to treat housing as a human right and have thousands more units of social, supportive, and affordable housing in our community.
Thank you once again. So just so I'm clear here, there's 100 people with the highest acuity levels living in the hotel. I hope you'd have that number tonight.
No, that's not exactly what I said. Do you know what, to be honest, I'm not familiar with the inner operations of the shelter system, and I don't know the individuals involved.
Yeah,
but there's about 100 people with nowhere to go once the travel lodge funding comes
I'll
out.
weigh in here, Councilor McCann. General comment, you're not going to get the detail that you want. It doesn't exist. The plan doesn't exist. The location doesn't exist. What the question that faces council is whether we are willing to allocate funding and delegate to the CAO the authority to go spend it on the people with the greatest need.
Okay, I'll move on, and I'll come back to that, because I got some pretty good points. So you're saying there is really no transition plan, it hasn't changed. We don't know how many people this $400,000 is really going to go to. We don't know exactly where they're going to go. And that brings me to my last question about putting Barrie inside the motion. Mayor Lehman, you're on track. You've already had discussions with the province, I believe, and the federal governments, and you're looking at Kempeth Health Center in Springwater. Well, those.
No, I've received no response from anybody in the meeting. Councillor Harris, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you. Through you. With the Kempenfeld area, there was just concerns with the where the location is right now. I don't think it's off the table as an option, but nothing is concrete. It was the first time it came up on Monday, I guess, so it's still being investigated.
appreciate that, Councilor. And I think I'm keeping up pretty well here, but you had just mentioned you started negotiations or talks, or at least you had one conversation about including Kempenfeld Center, which is in Innisfil, and Springwater, which is not in Barrie, and we're just passing a motion now that says it's only going to be in Barrie. So all I'm saying is, why are we having Barrie? Let's not just make it Barrie, because homelessness is not a Barrie problem. It's not even a Simcoe County problem. It's an Ontario problem that we have here. And why handcuff our province or our federal leaders, right? Like, am I making sense here? Am I making sense to you, Mayor Lehman?
Yeah, the wording of the motion is to help the people who are in emergency shelter in Barrie. So if they happen to go, to Innisfil or Springwater, or if there was capacity in Midland, I would still be okay with spending the money as long as we're helping the people who are in Barrie. And that's what the motion says.
Well, I do appreciate that clarity, because then I'm on the same page, because I do think that those locations could be a good location. I guess the two more things I have, and it's not that I don't believe you moving the motion, but you say this is a one-time fee of $400,000. The passion that you've had for 4 years that I've known you, and the passion you brought today, when the money runs out, are you not going to come back and ask for more money? Can you honestly tell me that tonight?
I will keep fighting, absolutely. I think I'll take the fight more forcefully to the provincial and federal government, though. I had the honor of participating in a rally, Housing for All, that started at the Travel Lodge, and we marched to downtown Barrie, and we were calling on all levels of government to step up to the plate. And I will never back down, because it's the right thing to do, and I think people in our community deserve that support, and I'll do whatever it takes. Yeah.
So it's that passion that is making me not want to say yes to this motion, because I'm actually in favor of your outcome, but I don't think you're going to get there with the $400,000, because having no plan is not having a plan. And I have not convinced that this $400,000 is going to be spent wisely. And so if I had a more wise plan, and a plan that after the $400,000 is spent, what is happening next? Well, you just told me you're going to ask for more money. So when does it stop? And so I guess my answer is going to be no for this amendment. But if it does pass, I want to ask you if you have a friendly. Even though I'm going to vote no for this, I want to ask you if a friendly, that staff report back in September and October to General Committee and tell us exactly where this $400 went and how it was spent. I don't have a shadow of a doubt that I will lose tonight.
Okay, so Councillor Aylwin's just taking that as friendly. Councillor McCann. So that's 3 improvements that members of council have made here, and that improvement will be that staff report back in September on any funds expended. That'll be the end of the paragraph. I will remind members of General Committee that you do not have spending authority after the summer. So the council is lame duck. There will be no new money in September. There can be a report back on staff, or by staff, on how money was spent, but we will not be able to allocate any new spending after the summer, just to be clear. I will take additional comments on the amendment that's on the floor. Thank you, Councillor McCann, for your comments. And then I would like to call the question on it, as there are other amendments and other business for council tonight. So where we are, just to sum up again, we've had the 3 friendly amendments, and I can't blame anybody for losing track of them, but just to be clear, those were to add in Barrie after the words emergency shelter services. The request to the county to cost share 3-to-1 our $400,000 commitment that would be made by this amendment. And the that wasn't a friendly, that was voted on. And then prioritizing the highest acuity individuals, that was taken as a friendly. And then finally, the last one, which was the 3rd friendly, was Councillor McCann's, which is to ask staff to report back on how any funds were expended in September. That's what's on the floor, members of General Committee. Would anyone like to say anything else? Okay. I'll just make a couple of closing comments. I appreciated, it might have been Councillor Harvey, I've forgotten, who sort of kicked this off by saying it's good for us to put our money where our mouth is. I'll just remind council there's some odd symmetry to this, because the very first motion this council passed, the 11 of us, was to support the 88, Busby's Capital campaign to create additional shelter capacity. It was the very first thing you did after inauguration. And this may be the last time you the last new money you approve. That's actually, while it's kind of odd, it's actually kind of sad. Because what's happened is a council that I think had every intent of trying to end chronic homelessness is instead dealing with a problem that is much worse. And again, I'm not going to engage in the blame game because I frankly think there's blame on all 4 levels of government, and this is a uniquely Canadian problem where all 4 levels of government share some responsibility, and that maybe is part of the problem. How do you get things done with 1 level, let alone 4? But regardless of how we've got to where we are today, I think this one's really important for a couple of reasons. One is, consistently through this council, and I said this earlier, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, we have said it's not enough. What's happening to support or address the homelessness problem in our community, the number of our friends and neighbors who are experiencing homelessness, is not enough. And so we've been in the tough position of ad hoc, without detail. I get Councilor McCann's point. You want to plan if you're going to fund something, but you're not going to get it tonight because it's not that kind of a situation. But, you know, we have continually, as council, chosen to step up on a number of different occasions, and Councillor Owen and I think the service providers, but far more importantly, basic humanity is asking us to step up again. And so I have every confidence that our CAO will be careful with these dollars, that he will work closely with the county to best spend them. I think the additional direction that's been provided is good. And I would just remind you, because nobody's brought it up yet, that the particular funding source, the reinvestment reserve, is considerably further ahead than we thought it would be because it's funded by the Electra dividends, and Electra did $1 million better this year than we thought it would. So on a net fiscal basis, we're still, you can be confident you're not overall affecting the city's finances in a negative way. So I am absolutely going to support this, and it won't be enough. I think those who've made the comments, including Councillor Harvey, I think, it's true. But at the very least, we're putting our money where our mouth is, and it will help, because it's not nothing. So I'll call the question on it. Those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? 1. That carries. Okay. The third amendment that was circulated has to do with the protocol around interacting with encampments. Now, Councillor Natalie Harris, you had circulated one about a meeting with all stakeholders. I'd rather address that first, members of the General Committee, because it's still sort of on the same topic of how we deal with the closure of the motel model. So, Councillor Harris, did you want to introduce that or a version thereof?
Sure, thanks, Mayor Lehman. So yeah, I think everyone does have a copy of it now, that the City of Barrie calls on the provincial government, federal government, and County of Simcoe to immediately facilitate a meeting with all, and of course that it would be with all is a difficult word to add, but that's there to discuss, stakeholders surrounding the homelessness crisis in Barrie to create an immediate plan to relocate anyone not able to be sheltered when the Travelodge program expires, and to work together to establish permanent social and supportive housing for individuals currently living in emergency shelters, which includes discussion regarding additional funding options from all levels. I can speak to it.
Sorry, so the last part there was new, I think, the last few words.
Yes.
Can you just give us that again?
And that would include discussion regarding additional funding options from all levels of government. So my intent is to have this meeting and to cover as many bases as possible. Obviously, we've passed the first part of the motion requesting money, but I think also to, you know, what Councillor McCann is talking about, you know, what is the fulsome plan? Where will money go? I agree, it's very difficult. There's a lot of different layers of government that we're trying to navigate through, and here we are at the city level dealing with this crisis. And my experience with trying to find some resolutions and working behind the scenes up until today is that it just hasn't been a complete conversation around the table yet with stakeholders that could possibly, potentially support this. So that's where this is coming from.
Okay, and you left the original language that the city would call on the other 3 levels to facilitate that meeting?
Is that what I said, Mandy? Yeah, probably. Yes. I'm, of course, I'm offering to help behind the scenes as well with invitations, questions, etc. But yes.
Okay, the amendment is on the floor, so it would be a new paragraph. Comments? Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I like the theme of this. I guess my only concern is it doesn't direct any one party to be the lead in these stakeholder meetings. And it, again, I'll leave it up to Councillor Harris, but I think it would probably be advisable to indicate one party to be the one to make these arrangements, so that way it actually directs one party to facilitate this, opposed to it being a little open with 4 different parties involved, and it may never happen.
Yeah, I would agree, Councillor Harvey, and that obviously should be the county who have the responsibility for the transition planning. Councillor Harris?
Sure, it can be the county if that's the will of council. I have had conversations with MPP Kanjan that said that she would work with me, and her and I could take the lead as well if possible, but the county, of course, would be the best choice right now.
Yeah, I mean, given they would have the funding to pay for anything that you come up with, and the responsibility as well to deliver it through the service provision, I think. So, if I might suggest, in the wording, City of Barrie calls on the County of Simcoe to immediately facilitate a meeting with all stakeholders, and that's where you could including the provincial and federal government. Yeah? Okay. Members of the General Committee, you clear what the amendment is? Yep. Okay, I'll call the question on it. Those in favor of that amendment? Anybody opposed? No, that passes. Okay, finally, Councillor Aylwin, I think you have one more. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lehman. So the final amendment that has been circulated as well is that paragraph 2 be replaced with the following. That staff in the Enforcement Services Branch and Operations Department, in consultation with community partners, be directed to develop a protocol for interacting with individuals living in encampments that ensures that all possible alternatives to encampment evictions are meaningfully explored through engagement with encampment residents and outreach organizations, and that staff report back to General Committee with any resources that may be required to strengthen engagement and facilitate alternatives to eviction. And I can speak to that.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. So, as of today, the most recent number I heard is that we have 57 people living in encampments that are being served by Busby, and that's just people who are being served by Busby in encampments. There are likely more throughout the city. So, no matter what happens with the travel lodge, the hotel model of emergency shelter, we have a serious problem on our hands. And we know that evicting people from encampments doesn't solve homelessness, and that, in fact, when you evict people from encampments, it can actively harm them by displacing them from a community that they've built at that encampment, moving them into a deeper natural area, for example, into deeper isolation, and away from the services that they desperately need. And then finally, it's not an efficient use of public resources, because what we are finding is that when people are evicted from encampments, they just move their camp to another location, and we're right back at square one. Now, having said that, I recognize that there are some serious concerns with safety at encampments, around fire safety, around garbage and garbage disposal, and those need to be taken seriously. And I think we've heard from Chief Mainprize that they're developing some plans on the fire safety side of things, which is really good to see. And then the ultimate solution, obviously, is to house people so that they don't have to live in an encampment, but we know we're a ways away from that. So the original motion was to look at the protocol on homeless encampments in Canada and adopt that protocol. Now, I think I've heard some concerns from members of council, some concerns from staff on that in the confidential memo, and I understand those concerns, and while I may not agree with all of them, I would rather see council come together on this and find a way that we can treat people in encampments with dignity and respect, in a way that our staff feel comfortable with in terms of liability and resourcing. So The intention here is that there's a clear protocol in place so that the Enforcement Services Branch, the Operations Department, community partners like outreach agencies, the police, that we're all on the same page. Because up until this point, it hasn't really been like that. It's been a bit haphazard even, or inconsistent, the approach to encampments from different organizations, namely enforcement services and the police. There's been a bit of a disconnect, and I'm hoping we can bring everyone together and have everyone on the same page and have a clear protocol for how we support people in encampments that doesn't go to eviction as a first step or a second step. That's the last step. We actually should ensure that people have access to other supports in place before we do that. And I think a protocol could actually help us reduce some liability as well by having clear guidelines in place for everyone involved. And I'm hopeful that we can all come together on this and support it.
Thanks, Councillor Irwin. On the amendment, Councillor Morales and Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I can't vote in favor of something that's going to legitimize encampments, plain and simple. I understand the intent of this amendment. I don't want us to end up in a situation like Toronto did at Trinity Bellwoods Park last year. That was frustrating for everybody involved. That was frustrating for the people who had to be removed from there. That was frustrating for the residents and people who enjoy the park. That brought out the worst of a lot of people, including the people who had to respond to the calls. So I don't want us to get us to that worst scenario. Do we have an issue? Absolutely. Did we take small steps tonight to get there and call action other levels of government? Absolutely. But anything that is going to legitimize encampments in the Lovers Creek area, in Ward 9 Southeast Barrie, and the Bayfield area is not a good short-term solution for the residents in the nearby area, or a medium and a long-term solution for the people actually living in the encampments. So I think we need to put forward our energy into the other steps that we're taking, either to getting funding, to do wraparound services, and to getting people in housing. And I think for myself at least, this just goes that one step too far and not something I want to legitimize.
Okay, Councillor Morales, just to be clear, because from your comments it sounded a bit more like you had concerns with the original motion. This amendment, this new paragraph 2, doesn't legitimize or amend our bylaws or allow encampments. What it does is it, I believe, directs that all other alternatives be fully explored before people are required to leave. That may be too far for you, but just I want to make sure General Committee's clear on what the amendment says.
I appreciate your follow-up comments, and I'll just start this by saying it's a little bit late. So I'm not saying this with sarcasm or passive aggressiveness. I'm reading between the lines. It doesn't have the words. It's still doing the same thing. I've been in politics long enough to again read between the lines and know how what staff are going to maybe respond. And maybe I'm being presumptuous, and I'm okay being wrong. But to me, this is more or less the same without the impact words.
Okay, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Question to staff. Probably Ms. McAlpine might be the best one to answer this, as she's provided our weekly updates when it comes to the outreach. My understanding is staff are already doing what this paragraph states, that they're not going in immediately and removing people, and that they're reaching out to the resources within the city, trying to assist people before finally push comes to shove, when it is a safety issue and potential fire hazards, health hazards, that type of thing, that's only then the only time that these encampments are then taken down. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor Harvey. When a complaint related to an encampment or camping on city lands is received, the nature of the complaint is reviewed and it's prioritized for response. So health and safety issues are our first priority. So that could be needles, waste, fires, etc. The protection of the environment from contamination of soil and water, and quality of life considerations like noise violations are a next priority. And the lowest priority is is what people would say is the visible evidence of poverty. That's the lowest priority in terms of a complaint. When those complaints, after they've been analyzed, municipal law reaches out to, at this point, historically it was Busby, because at the time the protocol that we do have was established, Busby was the primary organization to advise that a complaint had been received. They attend the site to educate the individuals about the prohibitions in the city's bylaw, typically issuing a notice of violation or a warning that says that they have 24 hours to address any violations. And then they return after the 24-hour period based on the resources that we have available. So it may not be on hour 24, it might be 2 days later if staff have been prioritized otherwise. And if the person or the fire or whatever the violation is still present, then the person indicates that they need a longer period to achieve housing or to address a matter, and it's a reasonable extension, staff will consider that reasonable extension and grant it. However, at the end of the timeline, after any extensions, then if individuals don't choose to leave, there may be fines issued. In 95% of the time, fines have not been issued. So, you know, is it perfect and does it achieve everything that I believe Councillor Aylwin is seeking? No. I believe he's seeking something further than that, and but that is the approach. It's typically education, then verbal or written warnings, an attempt after we've contacted outreach organizations with the hope that they might be able to find alternative shelter for people, and lastly is fines or any other action.
Great, thank you. I struggle in supporting the way this is pictured, because I do have some concerns, as Councillor Morales mentioned. We have to be careful. As politicians, we can't direct the police. I know it's not written in this paragraph, however, it was discussed when Councillor Aylwin was speaking. And it sounds like our enforcement staff, from a bylaw perspective, have been extremely lenient with the people, which I'm glad to hear, because especially when it comes to fines being laid, most of these people don't have the ability to pay the fines and end up with surety warrants put out for them, which the last place they need to be doing is spending a few days in jail because they couldn't pay a couple $100 fine. But on the flip side, we also have to look at the health and safety of these people. We just recently had an encampment fire where someone passed away. And I think this just goes too far, that potentially opens up the door for that happening again. And I think we have to be very cautious about really leveraging our enforcement staff when what I'm hearing from Ms. McAlpine is they're doing a heck of a job. They're doing their job as compassionate as they can without overstepping the bounds. However, there does become a point where you have to say this is a health and safety issue and you can't be here anymore because of that issue. For those reasons, I have difficulty in supporting it, but I will listen to what my colleagues have to say.
Other comments on the amendment? Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And I love the intention of this, and I thank Ms. McAlpine for speaking to that, because through other dialogue, and I believe through Councillor Harvey's question, we do highlight what we are doing. And I struggled with some of the framing of it with respects to being a bit more directive. I was wondering, and I can send it around, if there would be openness to an amendment. I do like the intention, and so I was wondering if I'm able to table an amendment at this time.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm looking to lift basically the first sentence and the last two lines to read as follows, and I will send this by email. That staff in the Enforcement Services Branch and Operations Department, in consultation with community partners, report back to General Committee with any resources that may be required to strengthen engagement and facilitate alternatives to eviction. And I was wondering if that helped to lift this maybe to a different level of saying we acknowledge what staff are doing, whether we call it a protocol or not, that there is a process in place that staff have been able to identify to us that aims, I think, to ensure individuals are approached respectfully and with dignity, and that we are working with service provider partners. But I am wondering if there's of any benefit to the intention of this really being identifying with consultation with providers. Is there anything that could be improved? So if we think about better has no limits, is there any opportunity for us to kind of say, what do staff need? Or is there anything on our end as a city of Barrie that could complement what we're currently doing in a way in which facilitates the best outcomes possible? And I'll email that right now.
Okay, yeah, I'm a little confused by the impact of the amendment, so I'm going to wait to see the wording. Mr. Prowse?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. While you're waiting for the amendment, I thought members of council might benefit from information that staff have already been working with Barrie Police on, we'll use the term, the protocol. Earlier this year, members of council are aware that there were some concerns raised by the supportive community in and around the approach to encampments. And what we found from discussions with Barrie Police, certainly when we are dealing with health and safety and life issues, Barrie Police have their own mandate. They don't ask the city for permission, nor do they, frankly, ask the service providers for permission. They do what police do. But we recognized in conversations with Barrie Police, we did have an opportunity to make sure that the approach of municipal law enforcement and the approach of Barrie Police was the same on those non-life-threatening issues. And we'll call that the protocol. So they've done the work over the last several weeks. The group in Tammy Banting's department, along with Barrie Police, have worked on that protocol with the intent of sharing with the public, sharing it with the user groups, sharing it with members of council, really under the heading of full transparency on how we're going to approach these non-life-threatening situations. The amendments that are on the floor and as are proposed would certainly go further than that and ask staff to report back. But I would caution it might also stop us from finalizing that protocol and putting it in place because it would leave the door open to reporting back on additional measures. And I would say that our approach has differed in that I think the original piece called for consultation with community partners, which, as I have expressed to Councillor Elwin, is challenging when the protocol really speaks to law enforcement issues. Generally, we don't go to the public and ask them their opinion and their approach when it comes down to law enforcement issues. There are certainly other areas where we can learn from and work with those support groups, and that is also the intention. The City of Barrie staff and the Barrie Police staff will start having regular meetings with these community groups so that we can work more collaboratively when we are servicing those that are unhoused and in encampments. But I wanted to offer that information because members of council may not have it as they deliberate their decision tonight.
Okay, the amendment to the amendment that's being moved by Councillor Kungl has been circulated. It would essentially eliminate the discussion of the protocol and change this proposed amendment into just direction to staff in enforcement and operations in consultation with community partners to report back to General Committee with any resources required to strengthen engagement and facilitate alternatives to eviction. That's the language.
Mayor Lehman.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Kungl.
Sorry, if I may, with CEO Prouse's context provided, I'll withdraw the amendment.
Okay. So we're back to the language that Councillor Aylwin has circulated. Thanks, Councillor Kungl. On the amendment, on the language that was originally provided. Councillor Aylwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And thank you, CAO Prowse, for that additional information. It's very much appreciated. And to clarify, the intent of this amendment was to have staff report back on any resources that may be required to strengthen engagement and facilitate alternatives to eviction, but not to report back on the protocol itself. So that was one clarification there. And the reason, as you correctly pointed out, CAO Prowse, for the amendment here is to support the work that staff are doing in developing the protocol, because I think that is excellent work that you're doing. I had a chance to see the draft today, and I think it's a great start. I think the intention here is to have council provide some additional direction to staff to ensure that the protocol takes into consideration that all possible alternatives to encampment evictions are meaningfully explored through engagement with encampment residents and outreach organizations. So that's one. And that staff do consult with community partners, because I think community partners and outreach organizations are a key part of any response to people living in encampments, and they should be at a very minimum consultant in the development of the protocol, and I'm hoping that council will direct that this evening to supplement the work that staff is already doing, because we know that it's not just an enforcement matter, because the issues that cause people to be in encampments aren't criminal in nature. Poverty isn't a crime. Homelessness isn't a crime. So it's not just an enforcement issue, it's a societal issue and a community issue. So I think those community and social service partners need to be at the table.
Okay, I have a speakers list. Councillor Thompson, you're first on it.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Ms. Banting. With this motion, if an irate resident calls at the end of the week where a dog's come in with a needle in the paw or something, would this limit your powers of your department? Or would you have to go through all the channels of community partners before eviction and stuff like that? Or could you act immediately to resolve the hazard and the fear of the resident?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson, I would say if the life safety matters are still the focal point of the process or protocol procedure that we develop, then that would not limit that. In that particular case, that would be a health and safety matter for not only the pet that was in the park, but any other person that may be in or around that park area.
So you would be able to deal with the issue without a long process and stuff and listen, we've had 33 complaints this year, 0 offenses. So we are actually, with a real care and compassion approach to this, because I don't think anybody wants to, move people along and stuff, but at some times, and just with those stats, we're not criminalizing homelessness, but there are times where the behavior in the encampments is criminal. And, we've had 911 calls of people in the encampments, to deal with issues. And if you read studies, the reports of people living in encampments is actually, it's sad, from assaults and sexual assaults and, all kinds of things. So I just want to make sure that if this was to pass, that your department doesn't lose the ability to, alleviate real troubles.
Through your worship to Councillor Thompson, I would say we have to, the collaborative effort, we have to look at both sides of the picture. Not only dealing with the overall camping, as Ms. McAlpine mentioned, but the life safety issues. If those are built into the process that is developed together with the agencies and other enforcement agencies and ourselves, then I think we do have to keep those two measures in play. But if we're looking at consulting with all the groups while keeping in mind those health and safety measures are always the forefront of everyone's decision going into it, then I think we have the ability to still act on what our regulations currently say.
Thank you.
Next, I have Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman. My question actually is to CAO Proust with regards to the work that's happening on, I'm wary to use the word protocol, but you know what I mean, with Barrie Police. Is it part of the community well-being plan, or is that something that's just happening on its own?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Natalie Harris. No, Councillor Harris, it was actually initiated on its own as a result of some of the I think miscommunications we had dealing with some of the encampments, primarily, in fairness, Barrie Police. While their intention was good, I think some of the community groups were left a little bit confused. So we got together, and the teams have had several conversations around how we can make sure that we are on the same page with these circumstances. So it's separate from the Community Safety Well-Building Plan.
Okay, great. And also, there's a draft, apparently. If it's possible to be circulated, that would be great. I didn't even know, maybe did I miss an email that this was even happening? That would have been really awesome to know. And is there a plan on when that draft will be finalized?
Again, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Natalie Harris. Yes, my apologies. There is a draft. As you will recall, Council had a fairly robust item for discussion tonight, which could have dramatically changed the course of how the city deals with things. Until that was dealt with and Council does what Council does, staff really weren't in the position of finalizing that. So that will probably be finalized depending on the outcome of tonight. Will be shared with Council and the public. And again, it really just speaks to how the different agencies, both municipal law enforcement and Barrie Police, will undertake these issues.
That's great. I'm happy to hear that conversation's happening. Wonderful.
Okay, the amendments on the floor. Are there further comments? Councillor Morales and Councillor Ard.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. To Ms. Banting, I think. I just kind of actually thought of this while while listening to my colleagues. Encampments. We traditionally think of off Bayfield, 400 Bayfield. We think of Lovers Creek in Ward 9 and a little bit in Ward 8. But the word is a little bit loosely defined. Would an encampment be considered an encampment by this definition in your department of tents and a similar setup, say in downtown Barrie, either in an alleyway or a blank wall, if you will, with minimal pedestrian activation?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Morales, it depends on the location, what the definition would be. Our regulations currently speak to city-owned properties. So whether that be a park facility, a open space area, environmentally protected, could be the roadway, it could be any city-owned properties.
And that includes sidewalks and right-of-ways?
They are considered part of the roadway, but yes, in the loosest term, it could be considered an encampment if someone was to set up a area or a site.
Okay. The comments that I've heard from Ms. McAlpine, and again, the experience I've had with Ms. McAlpine, she tells it to you how it is. She's not picking sides. I am confident in the way it's being handled right now. And the fact that language is loose about something like a downtown or a right away, and again, I'm not trying to be dramatic here, and the Simpsons joke of pearl clutching, but right of ways exist in the front of our residents' homes as well. City owns about a meter and a half, if you will, Ms. Banting, in front of a home. So again, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but lots of big houses that have big frontages, deep lots, they're set back a little bit more. This is a scenario that currently doesn't exist, but specifically the downtown one does concern me. So that is further another reason why I think that the current response, as Councillor Thompson said, is compassionate. It appears to be working and being engageful, and I see no need for this language. But I do think, obviously, let's take that energy and put it into moving the needle a bit on housing.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Question for the mover of the motion. Obviously, there's been quite a bit of discussion about this draft protocol. Doesn't sound like any of us around the table, other than yourself, has seen this draft protocol. Is there something in that draft protocol that you don't like, that you feel the need to bring this motion forward? Because it sounds like staff are very well on their way in creating this protocol that you're asking for, to the point where a draft is already created, and I'm really confused as to the necessity of this motion when in fact you've already seen the draft. So is there something glaring in that draft that you don't like, that you'd like fixed?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Harvey. Yes, there are two things. The first is around engagement and consultation with community partners and outreach organizations, social services that serve people experiencing homelessness. I think that needs to be more explicit in the protocol, and actually those groups need to be consulted in the development of the protocol as well. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I think we do need some stronger language around ensuring that all possible alternatives to encampment evictions are meaningfully explored through engagement with encampment residents and outreach organizations. While staff have done a wonderful job with the protocol, I think we could go a bit further in terms of ensuring that eviction is a step that's further down the line. Doesn't mean it's not available if you've exhausted other options, but I'm hoping that we can take an approach that is more cooperative with people who are actually living in encampments, actually ask people what they need and what they want and where they want to go, and then also more cooperative with the organizations that support those people as well. I hope that answers your question.
Sort of does. I guess I have to be careful how I ask my questions, though, of staff, because quite evidently this is not a public document that we're talking about right now. Would I be incorrect in assuming that, Mayor Lehman?
You can ask the CAO. I think Ms. McAlpine just described the protocol in some detail, Councillor Harvey, so I don't think there's anything that's hidden here. It's just being written down.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Question to staff, whoever feels best to answer it. When it comes to Councillor Elwin's concerns about outside agencies not being involved with this, can you speak to any involvement that outside agencies would have been involved when it comes to creating this protocol, or was it solely created by the city staff?
Mr. President.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harvey, I'll take a crack at it. Ms. McAlpine can fill in the points that I miss. So the protocol or agreed to approach was a, as Ms. McAlpine indicated, we've always had a procedure or a protocol. Every organization does, and especially when you're dealing with enforcement. This came out of, as I indicated earlier, some confusion from the community support groups on time limits and approach to things. So we got together with Barrie Police and we talked that through and made sure that we were all on the same page. The intention was not to boil the ocean on it, and the intention was not to go and seek input from all of the different community groups. Members of council are well aware that you don't have the ability to direct Barrie Police. Their participation in this is voluntary. They've been very collaborative in agreeing that we wanted to be on the same page, same messaging on this, including engagement with the groups that support those that are unhoused. So we are all in agreement on that. However, the challenge unfolds, again, Barrie Police are their own organization who will march to their own orders, literally, and the city, in many cases, is supporting them in that. So this was an attempt to get us all on the same page, and we thought that the best way to do that would be to be transparent with the community, refresh our process, our procedure, our protocol, and then share it with the community. Councillor Elwin actually saw me this afternoon on a related matter talking about tonight, and I thought that was an opportunity to share that with him, but cautioned him it was still in the draft and not yet formalized. So we are here tonight.
Okay, great, thanks. I'll leave it at that. I still have a hard time supporting this when it's very apparent staff are well on their way in completing this and have already completed an initial draft. And we've heard from staff the way they currently deal with the situations. And as has been mentioned already, I'm very comfortable with the way they've been dealing with these situations because it really does come down to health and safety in most situations where they end up having to go in and move them along. I'll leave my comments at that.
Okay, any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Jim Harris, sorry, I did see you first, Councillor Riepma, and then Councillor Jim Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my view of this is that staff are well along producing this protocol. I'd like them to finish it based on how they see it going. If we have issues with it when it's finished, then we can reconvene and have a discussion about it. But at this point, it seems to me that we're just not ready to have this discussion. It seems to me that let's have staff finish what they're doing, and then I'm sure it'll be put into motion, and let's hope that it works well. And if it doesn't, we can always have another discussion.
Thanks, Councillor Riepma. Councillor Jim Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll be brief. I appreciate the intention, but I am concerned, as others, and maybe share originally Councillor Congo's thoughts. And recognizing, in the experience with Barrie Police Services and the Buzzard Street Centre and the shelter staff, last summer, as you recall, Ward 8 was the ward that hosted the shelter. And, the experience of encampments for me as the councillor who receives calls is significantly different this year than it was last year. But I can tell you, last year, and thank you to Sarah and her team and Barrie Police Services, that the response to the concerns that were raised by both businesses and residents, in each occasion, that it was done thoughtfully and collaboratively. So I think we are in a good place. Like I've said before, there's really 4 accepted responses to dealing with encampments. One's removal, just close it. One's removal support. One's tacit acceptance, and one's formally approving them. And the literature doesn't really have any good definitive description on what's the best approach. So I think right now, knowing we have a report coming, a protocol coming that we're working to improve, I would like to wait for that. So I will not I will not vote for the amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Any other comments before I call the question? Go ahead, Councillor Owen.
Very quickly, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I think the important thing here is that the approach hasn't been as collaborative as it should be so far. I think we're painting a bit of a rosy picture about how it's been. I think our staff in municipal law enforcement have been fantastic with engaging with outreach organizations and people living in encampments. We have run into a bit of a problem with Barrie Police specifically recently, and there's been a lack of communication. And I think that's why we need to actually direct our staff to engage with these organizations in the creation of this protocol. May 31st, we had a meeting with municipal law enforcement, Barrie Police, outreach organizations, RBH was there, and we discussed encampments, and everyone at that meeting agreed that the approach that we are currently taking isn't serving the people in encampments, isn't serving the community, because it just displaces encampments to another area, and that we need closer collaboration. And that collaboration has actually fallen apart since that meeting. So I'm hoping we can formalize that collaboration through this amendment this evening, and that's the intention here. So I'm really hoping that we can change that approach and collaborate with community organizations.
Okay, Councillor Natalie Harris, and then I'm going to call a vote. Go ahead.
Sure, I'll be really quick. Thanks, Mayor Lehman. Yeah, just going on top of what Councillor Aylwin said, I think it's really important to remind everyone that including the services includes the lived experience voice, and that's huge. So no matter how much we read studies and do our due diligence to learn what we could help to help people, the people that need to be helped, those voices 100% need to be heard, and the service providers are those voices. They're the messenger for sure, and that's why it's really important to have them here too.
Okay, thanks for that. On the amendment, Councillor Thompson, did you have a question or something?
Yeah, Mayor Lehman, if I could be really quick. I understand, and I want to be quick that we are, like, the collaboration's not great, and you know, nobody talks about this. The actual providers of people we want to collaborate with, our staff, and they have trouble getting along. And that's some of our problems. Some of our organizations don't collaborate very well. So I'm just like, every time we shine, like, you know, bad light on our staff, on Barrie Police, but we never call out that some of our providers have a lot of problems in their collaboration. And this is why, like, I think this motion, well, it's just a correction to what paragraph 2 was, because there was a lot of blowback from council and staff, that this is just kind of a softer tone to it, but it actually shines a poor light on our staff and the great work they've done. They were already in the midst of doing things, but if we're gonna call out our staff and the police and everything, like, and hopefully in your meetings, like, you can have a collaboration from all our service providers as well. And that's some of my concern. Like, we're very quick to blame our side, you know, of staff and stuff, who are doing a great job. But some of the problems is in our providers of their collaborations. So I'll leave it at that, and I won't be supporting this.
I'm not willing to let this descend into a blame game of different organizations. We have an amendment on the floor. There's no point in it. Further discussion on it, Councillor Aylwin. So I'll let you make a very final point, but I'm not interested in any back and forth about who's to blame, who's doing a good job, bad job. It's time to vote on this amendment, then let's continue with the business of council. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. The social service agencies aren't at the table right now. It's just enforcement services and Barrie Police developing this protocol. They're not even at the table. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. On the amendment, those in favor of the amendment, please indicate. 2, 3. Those opposed to the amendment. Okay, that fails with one abstention, I guess. That completes the amendments that have been circulated. Sorry, we're not clear on something? I had 3 councillors voting in favor. I had 5 opposed. I had Councillor McCann abstaining. Okay, as opposed or in favor? Opposed? Okay. So 6 opposed, 3 in favor. That fails. I don't see any further amendments. So we're on the main motion now as amended many, many times. Does anyone else have anything they want to say? Councillor Owen.
I'm really thankful for City Council's collaboration tonight. I think we had a great discussion and are moving the needle a little bit. We still have so much further to go. And I really hope that MP Doug Shipley, MP John Broussard, MPP Andrea Kanjan, MPP Doug Downey are paying attention and are working to address these crises in our communities. It's unacceptable that we're at this point. We should never have gotten to this point, and we really need them to step up and support Barrie and support our residents. And frankly, they've been absent so far, so we need to see more.
On the main motion, any others wish to comment? Deputy Mayor Ward.
Sorry, just a matter of clarification, make sure I'm clear. Councillor Owen's amendment was to replace paragraph 2. Does that mean paragraph 2 is still in this motion we're voting on? As it stands?
I wondered if somebody was going to raise that. Yes, at the moment, paragraph 2 is printed, is in
just
the motion.
Clear. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
I have an amendment.
I thought somebody might. I was going to remind you before I brought it to a vote. Go ahead, Councillor Thompson.
My amendment is to remove paragraph 2 in its entirety.
Okay. On Councillor Thompson's amendment to remove paragraph 2. Anyone wish to comment? Okay, I'll call the question on that amendment. Those in favor of removing paragraph 2? Opposed? 1. That carries. Okay. Paragraph 2 of the original motion is removed. There's some procedural wisdom. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Ward. Any other comments on the main motion as amended? Councillor Harris?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Yeah, no, thank you to everybody again. This has been a really complicated motion that's been taking a lot of time to craft. But in all fairness, I must say that there were representatives at the table, and I do have to give a shout out to MPP Andrea Kanjan. She has been in contact, tirelessly. We're still working on certain things. It's been complicated with the election time and et cetera, but she's even reaching out to other municipalities to see if they have space, et cetera. Like it's not, there's so much more. I totally agree, but I really think it's important to make sure that's mentioned. It is a topic on everyone's table, and it is being discussed.
Councillor McCann?
Just want to address Councillor Aylwin's comments about our MPs and our MPPs. They're doing a lot, and I think it's quite disrespectful for them talking this way. And I've had many discussions with all four of these members, and I would say, like Councillor Natalie Harris, thank you for the good work that they're doing. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Gary Harvey?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Yeah, I'd like to reaffirm similar comments. I did mention earlier of MP and an MPP that I've had conversations with exactly about this. So I think those comments were really out of line.
Okay, enough with the politics, guys. Can we make some comments on the motion, or are we just going to talk up or oppose our friends or enemies? Are you done? Okay, I'm going to call a question on the main motion as amended. Those in favor of the main motion as amended? Any opposed? None. That carries.